everybody, and welcome. It's that special day. It's Christmas, which is also Wednesday, which we normally do supernatural news, but we're not gonna today. Let's welcome in our co-hostess with the mostest, ladies and gentlemen. She's intelligent, she's witty, she's brilliant. She's also pretty easy on the eyes, and she'd also be my Mrs. Claus today. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is, Jessica Freeburg. Hi, Jess.
Blessed. I didn't even think about that.
You didn't think about what?
This jolly old Saint Nick and Mrs. Claus over here.
Yeah, see? I mean, I got my little, it'd be my little Santa pimp hat on today. If you're watching
I have
on
a little
video.
hat on my shirt, so
Yeah.
I'm wearing it down there.
Look at that. Is that a Santa lamb?
It's a llama. I'm wearing
a llama.
a llama sweater.
Ah,
That's
there
all
you go.
Christmassy.
Yeah.
And
I can't get much more Christmassy than John Cena's farewell tour. I don't know. It's just my way of saying goodbye to Christmas. I don't know.
I don't know.
It's red.
He is in a Christmas movie, though. He's in that. Is it Stepdads or what is that one with
Oh, that's true.
Mike Wahlberg? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Mark Wahlberg. I said
Wahlberg.
Mike. Who's Mike Wahlberg?
It's his twin brother.
Oh, come on. I know Mark Wahlberg. I love him.
Yeah. It's his twin brother. Yeah, sure, that works. That works. So today, this is kind of how it's going to work. First part of the program, we got some Christmassy type news stuff. Because, normally we do supernatural news, so we'll do some little Christmassy newsy stuff, some stuff to kind of make a light and airy type stuff. And then we're going to bring the scary. Because normally in old times, in Victorian times, we told kind of scary stories around the fire, didn't we?
Yes, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, so we're going to do Victorian Christmas stories in the second half of the program. So that's the part I know you all are looking forward to. But
yeah, it's kind of like the Scrooge, right? That's where he came from.
Yeah, except for we're not going to do the typical Christmas story, Scrooge Christmas story. Although, and we have a little bit of an offshoot story. I'll tell you, this is the lineup for today. Okay, so there's a Victorian Christmas story out there that's supposed to be absolutely horrifying, called "Horror: A True Tale." Did that scare you?
I'm so scared right now.
Okay, all right. There's also an Arthur Conan Doyle story out there that we'll talk about, and there's also the Doll's Ghost.
Ooh, I don't like dolls. That's going to be creepy.
Okay, so we'll do that one as well. And time pending, we may have another one out there as well. There's one called Old Hooker's Ghost that we may get into as well. It's not what
is that the not safe for work?
No, that's not like that. But
not on Jesus's birthday.
No, not on Jesus's birthday.
Come on.
But so we'll get into some scary stories today.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yay. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. So it's just our way of spending the holiday with you. And, that way you don't have to sit around and watch football on Netflix.
Or Hallmark Christmas movies all day.
Yeah, or Hallmark Christmas movies all day. That's for sure. Yeah. So we'll start it off with a little bit of Christmas news. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Let's hear it.
All right. The first one has to do with a man that ordered a 4-foot Santa, but when it arrived, it was bigger than his house.
Oh, that's bigger than 4 foot.
Well, that is a little bit bigger than 4 foot. Are you into the Christmas inflatables? Do you have any inflatables?
Well, when my kids were little, we did, but no, not anymore. They've all been popped.
Oh, no. Popped?
Popped and not replaced.
Oh, no. No. Okay, so I got one inflatable, and it's the Grinch. I think I mentioned that. I put the Grinch on front.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he's still standing. I don't know how. I'm not a very good inflatable caretaker. That didn't sound right.
Christmas miracle, Tim.
It is a Christmas miracle, right? But he's managed to last from, when did I put him out there? I think I put him out there beginning of December, and he's managed to last this long, even through sub-zero temperatures and snowstorms. And somehow I managed, and I got to thank our listeners too, because our listeners have given me tips on how to keep that sucker upright. I know that didn't sound right, but I managed to
Well,
Managed to-
sounds like a personal problem, Tim.
Managed to keep the little Grinch upright, so to speak. But yeah, he's still going. Yay.
That's good. He's a hardy Minnesota inflatable Grinch.
That doesn't sound right either. But this man ordered a 4-foot Santa, and when it arrived to his house, much bigger, Jess, much bigger than his house. I'll show you here. Look at that. Look at that guy.
What?
Look at that Santa.
He's like 20 foot tall.
Yeah, that's no Temu Santa right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah, he's big. I kind of see whenever I see the inflatables at, like Walmart or Menards or wherever I'm at, I kind of imagine like when I'm buying a little boxed inflatable or when I'm looking at a boxed inflatable, that's what I'm going for right there.
Yeah, the bigger the better.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Mrs. Claus likes a big Santa.
Yeah, what? Yeah. But this man can no longer park on his driveway after a 4-foot inflatable Santa he ordered ended up being bigger than his house. That could be a problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Dave Goodings, who's a 30-year-old DJ, which means he's about to leave radio soon, decided to put more effort into decorating his house for Christmas this year, but one mishap saw his decorations go from 0 to 100. Dave hoped a 4-foot Santa would do the job, and so he ordered one for $24.99, which he called a bargain. And that's a pretty good bargain.
Yeah, he got that giant thing for $24.99.
Right?
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm in for $24.99. When he purchased that and it arrived, however, it was a whopping 20 foot tall, which is bigger than his house. Holy cow. This puts it in perspective. This picture right here. Look at that, Jess. Boom. Look at that. Boom.
He's so big.
That's $24.99 worth of inflatable right there. I'm just saying.
We got a freaking bargain, man.
Yeah, he did. That's something else. The inflatable is, in fact, so big. How big is it that the DJ and his partner can no longer park in their driveway? It's true. Oh my God. There's a perspective pic here of the DJ
Let's see.
and his Santa. There it is right there.
He's just a little guy next to him.
I know, right? Now, it'd be even funny if they went out to a hoop and tried to play basketball together. Because he'd never get it past Santa. I'm just saying. Because the Santa is kind of looking like he's posting up. He's got like one hand up like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's blocking and defending.
Yep. You try and shoot it over Santa, you'll never get it over him. Dave said we kept it quite low key for the first couple of years, but this was the first year that we decorated the outside. We put icicles on the guttering and ordered the inflatable Santa online for $24.99. It was supposed to be 4 foot, but it was way bigger than we ever thought it would be. That's what she said. We thought the box was big, but we went with it. Suddenly, we've gone from no decorations to this giant inflatable, 0 to 100, he went on to say. The overly big decoration has become the talk of the town, with locals passing by Dave's home just to take a look. That's the only thing they've ever driven by his home to take a look at, I'm sure. The 30-year-old added, it's not that busy on our street, but within 10 minutes of inflating it, people were walking by and taking photos. One person said they could see it from the bottom of their road. It has become a mini tourist attraction. We even joked we might be stealing customers from Cheesington World of Adventures. Everyone wants to see the giant Santa. Oh, well, that's not a bad thing. Dave was forced to take the Santa down last weekend, though, for fear it would be blowing away as a storm approached the UK. He and his partner are now unsure whether to keep the huge decoration or sell it. You want to keep it.
Keep it.
Yeah. After Dave's TikTok post of the inflatable gained more than 50,000 views. We're in the wrong business.
I know. Every day I say this to myself, Tim. Every time we talk, I'm like, I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah. I got to figure out the social media thing. He's even had people message him for offers for the decoration. So they're willing to give him money for it. They're like, I want your giant Santa.
A real big Santa you got there, boy.
Hey, how much for your giant Santa? He told Lancashire Live, "It has been quite a ride since I got it, to say the least. People are saying we have to keep it, and I've also had offers to buy it. One guy from Ireland says he'd buy it if we could send it there. Other people are saying we should get an inflatable snowman to go with Santa." That'd be kind of cool. Although, where are you going to put it?
That would be cute.
I mean, if Santa takes up your entire driveway, where do you put the snowman?
The neighbor's driveway?
Yes. You take up the entire... You should just keep buying 20-foot inflatables until you've taken up the entire block.
I think so. Just make it a whole neighborhood thing.
Did you see the story? It's here in Minnesota. Did you see the story about something similar to this where everybody's buying a huge inflatable Santa and they're doing it in each house?
Yes, I did see that, and it's so cute. So their neighborhood is just all these inflatables when you drive down the street.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like that idea.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's like neighborhood cooperation to, I don't know, kill the environment with inflatables. I love it. Screw it.
Yeah, they don't. Those aren't biodegradable, are they, Tim?
No, you can't recycle those deals. No. It's like, and you know what else? Is we're also killing the people who love to parachute out of planes because they'll have no material left to have parachutes. So those people love to jump out of planes. Yeah, you know what? Fuck them. No, I mean, it's Christmas. I'm sorry, baby Jesus. But you know what? If they love to take their lives in their own hands, Jesus will save them. Right?
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, if they want to jump out of planes, well, you know what? That's how it's going to go. They're going to jump out of planes and they'll have to.
Maybe we could use our inflatables to jump out of planes. Like, we can have a dual purpose. We can have a giant Santa, and then when Christmas is over, you and I can go and get in a plane and jump out of it and just be like, woohoo!
You know what? We'll just let people who like to jump out of planes land on the inflatable Santa, and you and I can stay here on the ground. How does that sound?
That's a better idea, because I'm actually afraid of heights. So just saying that made me a little
scared.
Am
I. Yeah, so am I. I threw up in my mouth a little bit. So let's you and I stay here on the ground. People who want to jump out of planes, they can land on the inflatable Santa and take their own life in their own hands.
Yeah, we'll just supervise the landing.
That's right.
Good plan.
That's what we'll be here for. Dave went on to say, "I want to keep it. It's an opportunity too good to miss, but my missus is more realistic, and she's the one who's going to kill the relationship. So Merry Christmas to you, Dave."
Sounds like a Debbie Downer.
Yeah, Debbie Downer. I say get rid of the wife, keep the Santa. That's just me.
I agree. Mrs. Claus concurs.
That's it. Thank you, Mrs. Santa. I appreciate that very much. All right. Our next story is, it's a cup half full story.
Okay.
We all love Christmas carols. Some of us love the grandma got ran over by a reindeer story. And
classic.
It's and the Christmas Carol. It's a very good one. It's catchy. You start singing "Grandma got ran over by a reindeer."
My girls just serenaded my mom with it last night.
Oh no, they didn't. Really?
Yes, they did. She loved it.
No, really?
I mean, she was a bottle of wine into the evening.
Well,
so she was like, "Yeah."
That's why she loved it. Yeah. No, not a lot of grandmas like to sing along with that one. It turns out a real life grandma actually got run over by a real life reindeer in New York.
Oh no, that's so sad.
Or is it? Is it funny? I mean, we could argue this all day long.
What if she didn't die? Then we can laugh.
I don't think she died. She might have broke a hip.
Oh.
Let's find out. Now that Christmas is here, we can maybe laugh about this a little bit more. We all like the novelty song, "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer." Believe it or not, the song was released in 1979, Jess. I didn't think it was that old.
I remember singing it to my grandma as a kid, and she would get so mad. I didn't realize it was so new back in the day.
Yeah.
I thought it was just an old classic.
It was sung by the then married couple Elmo and Patsy, and it's quite prophetic. Little did Elmo Shropshire and Patsy Trigg know that 45 years after its release, that little silly song, that a grandmother was going... The song is about a grandmother being trampled to death by one of Santa's reindeer, that their song would actually come to life just without the Santa part. During the Turkey Day run in Watertown, a pack of deer decided to enter the race without having registered first, rendering them ineligible for any ribbons. In the footage shared with Dorrego's Service Center, the deer nimbly slices through the crowd of racers clad in their winter wear. Well, most of the deer were nimble. One of them slammed head-on into a group of 3 women full speed, knocking over 2 of them, including the titular grandmother. That's right, one of the old women got it from one of the deer. The reindeer quickly stood up and fled the scene. One of the trampled women was treated for minor injuries on the scene, while the other one was taken to the hospital via ambulance and treated for minor injuries.
No.
So, yeah.
She got hurt pretty badly then.
Oh, yeah, Grandma did
still minor, but she had to ride in the bus.
Yeah, she took a bus ride to the hospital. Let's hope no other novelty Christmas songs start coming to life this holiday season either, although Frosty the Snowman would be pretty cool. There's no telling what your father will do when that loaded pistol he keeps in the drawer at his bedside table happens if he catches your mother kissing Santa Claus. We'll just put it that way. So yeah, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to post this in the description of this program so you can see what happens when Grandma gets run over by a real life reindeer.
Yeah, maybe some stitches and a little black and blue.
Well, you never know. Maybe Grandma gets up and punches it in the nose, and then you have something different than turkey for dinner.
Just give Grandma a cocktail. She'll be fine.
That's right. Nothing solves that problem like wine. Just saying.
Just ask the mom.
That's right. So, us people here in Minnesota, we're pretty tolerant,
Oh, yeah. We put up with a lot.
Yeah. We're pretty understanding, We sometimes, at the holiday table, we invite everybody. Everybody can come on over for dinner. We make a plate for everyone. Especially at the state capitol this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new display, Jess, at the state capitol here over the holidays. It was put up by the Satanists.
Oh, okay. So it's not a baby Jesus in a manger?
No, far from it. Far from it. Turns out that the Satanists have a new holiday display. Let me show you what it looks like. This is their holiday display for Christmas. There you go.
Oh,
that's what it looks like.
That's scary. That's terrifying. I'm going to have nightmares.
That's scary. That's terrifying.
So it's like some sort of a phoenix, right?
Yeah, it looks like a phoenix rising, doesn't it?
Yeah, phoenix-ish.
Or
a pentagram above its head. And then what are the things dangling around it? Are they spiders?
Balls. No, I don't know what those are. I don't know. I'm kidding.
Balls?
Balls and turkey balls.
Turkey balls.
No,
okay.
I'm kidding. No, I don't know what those are. No, it kind of looks like a dying turkey, phoenix, some sort of thing or another.
It's icky.
It is. That's one way of putting it. It kind of looks like a dying turkey phoenix, doesn't it? Kind of has that look. The latest holiday display at the Minnesota State Capitol was created by a group of Satanists. Satan. What we know, according to a permit granted by the state, the display was set up last Friday, as a matter of fact, and will remain on display until Friday, December 27th, this coming Friday.
Okay.
It's kind of neat.
Well, you mean you don't want to discriminate if anyone wants to create a Christmas display? By all means.
Oh, bless your heart. That is so Minnesotan. Oh.
We got room for the Satanists too, Tim.
The display features a phoenix with a sigil of Baphomet's pentagram, which I think Dr. Heather Lynn would disagree that a sigil of Baphomet would not be accurate. We just had her on the program talking about Baphomet.
Yes, we did.
That wouldn't be accurate. The official symbol of the Church of Satan, and paper cranes hovering above the bird. According to Minnesota Satanists, the display symbolizes rebirth, empowerment, and self-determination. The phoenix represents transformation and rising stronger from adversity, mirroring the poem's call for liberation and personal triumph. The paper cranes, symbols of hope and wishes, reinforce the power of intention and renewal. Together, they inspire viewers to embrace their own strength, manifest their desires, and reclaim their agency. The backstory: the permit for the display was submitted by Cerebus Ministries, the organizational body of the Minnesota Satanists. It appears the state was compelled to grant the permit under the First Amendment. An email from the Minnesota Department of Administration notes that a permit for their First Amendment protected speech event does not imply an endorsement by the state. That is a direct quote from the state. Digging deeper, the Minnesota group was formerly aligned with the Satanic Temple. It should be noted that the Satanic Temple is more of a parody organization versus a worshiping body. According to its website, members identify as atheists and don't believe in Satan or other spiritual beings. However, earlier this year, the Minnesota Satanists became an independent satanic organization. On their website, the local group also makes it clear they do not believe in or worship Satan. So there you go.
So what's the point?
I think they're making a statement. Now,
I guess.
According to this is reaction to the satanic display, it says what they're saying. In an email to Fox 9, Minnesota Satanist congregation leader and founder Asmodeus Sion also indicated the Satanists were exercising their First Amendment rights. The statement reads, and this is a quote, "Our goal was representation, bringing joy and beauty to the community, as well as utilizing our First Amendment right. We choose the state capitol because we wanted to utilize a location that allows for religious plurality, as well as equal opportunity and representation is important to our beliefs. We celebrate that as Minnesotans and Americans, we are allowed to have differences of opinion and religious practice as guaranteed by the Constitution. We are glad that multiple viewpoints are covered in this year's Capitol displays." So
there you go.
They just said Merry Christmas in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, Merry Christmas to them too.
There you go. So, in our next story, do you think you know what an angel looks like?
Every time I look in the mirror, Tim.
Oh, look at you. See?
I'm just kidding.
Well, now I'm going to ask you the next question. When you look in the mirror, does it look like this?
No, that's an angel?
Yeah, that's
Are those
what
eyeballs all over it?
Yeah, that's what a biblically correct angel looks like.
I didn't know they had so many eyeballs.
Yeah.
I'm perplexed.
I was too when I first read the story.
Okay, well, I'm excited to learn what's with all the eyeballs on the angel.
Well, it turns out it's scary, it's weird, but more biblically accurate angels are atop some Christians' Christmas trees this year.
Okay.
I did not think that was a biblically accurate angel.
It looks like some sort of a sea monster.
It kind of looks like the spaghetti monster, doesn't it?
I don't know. I think I might rather put that phoenix on my Christmas tree.
Right? The satanic phoenix on top of your tree rather than the biblically accurate angel. Now,
creepy.
For those of you who are just listening on audio and not watching the video, what's the best way to describe that thing?
It's like a explosion of white, almost like looks like tentacles, right? And then there's eyeballs everywhere.
Yeah, it kind of, the best way to describe this is if you can, it's like the combination of a flower or a lily exploding out with tentacles on it. And it's got
a spider.
Or a spider, and it's got eyeballs all over the front of it.
Yeah, it's freaking bizarre. Well,
that's
cool.
Isn't it?
Okay, I'm learning new things today.
Yeah, I mean it's just got a bizarre look to it, right? Yeah, but it evidently is a biblically accurate angel. We go to Nashville, Tennessee, where it was during the pandemic when the Reverend Kira Austin Young and her puppet maker husband, Michael Schupbach, were going a little stir crazy that they came up with the idea. Instead of a star or some stylized humanoid angel to top their Christmas tree, why not create a biblically accurate angel? The result was a pink, blue, and gold feathered creature with 6 wings and dozens of eyes that went a bit viral. Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think in particularly the times of the world that we're in where things seem kind of scary and weird, having a scary and weird angel sort of speaks to people, she said. There are a number of different kinds of angels that show up in the Bible, said Austin Young, associate rector of the Episcopal Church of St. Mary, the Virgin in San Francisco. Rector damn near killed her, I'll tell you that much right now. For the most part, we don't get a lot of description of them, but both revelations at the end of the Bible and some of the books of the prophets in the Old Testament describe strange creatures around the throne of God. Some of them have 6 wings with eyes covering the wings, she said. Others have multiple animal heads. I think one of the delightful things about the Bible and the scripture is just kind of how bizarre it can be and just how kind of out there it can be, she went on to say. About 7 in 10 U.S. adults say they believe in angels, according to a poll by the Associated Press and NORC Center for Public Affairs Research conducted last year. Still, there's no agreement about what they look like or even exactly what they are. Social media is full of various interpretations of biblically accurate angels imagined not just in tree toppers, but also drawings, tattoos, even makeup tutorials. The many-eyed creatures reject traditional portrayals of angels in Western art, where they often look like humans with wings, usually white and often blonde or very fair. Esther Hamori, a professor of Hebrew Bible at Union Theological Seminary, makes a distinction between angels and other supernatural species in the Bible, like seraphim or cherubim. But she says she loves the biblically accurate angel trend, even if it conflates them. It shows that people are thinking about ways in which the Bible contains far stranger things than what's often taught. The author of God's Monsters, Vengeful Spirits, Deadly Angels, Hybrid Creatures, and Divine Hitmen of the Bible wrote in an email. The biblical heavens are filled with weird, frightening creatures and figures. In the Bible, God has an entourage of monsters. It's one way of putting it, I guess, right?
I like it.
One of Austin Young's favorite portrayals of the Annunciation, a favorite theme of Christian art depicting the Archangel Gabriel's appearance to Mary to announce that she's going to bear the Son of God, is by Henry Asawa Tanner. It conceives of Gabriel as a vaguely humanoid shaft of light. It kind of makes you rethink, what would that be like to be approached by an angel, she said. If it's somebody you don't know, or if it's a strange creature, or if it's just this kind of manifestation of God's message to you, that could be anything. Kind of an interesting thought. So, Jess, I'll ask you this. Let's say tonight before you go to bed, you're approached by an angel. What do you think that angel looks like?
Hope it looks all weird and gnarly like that one you just showed me. Now I double think I look like an angel. I'm a hot mess.
You hope it just kind of shows up looking like some sort of...
Yeah, give me like 6 arms and animal heads and eyeballs everywhere.
Just some sort of bizarre creature, not the typical fair-haired with wings and looking like
I can't relate to that perfect angel. I can relate to the one with all of the animal heads and tentacles.
Yeah?
Yeah, give me weird.
Give you weird. All right.
How about you? What kind of angel do you want, Tim?
I always kind of bought into the whole idea that an angel would appear to you the way that you're most comfortable. So it may show up looking like that thing that we just saw in the picture, and then all of a sudden you go, what in the actual? And then boom, it morphs into something that you're like, oh, okay, that's more pleasant. Oh. Yeah, I can dig it. Yeah.
Weird's my favorite, so it has to show up as weird for me.
Yeah, it may. Yeah, because you may at first you may be like, what in the actual, and see its true form.
Yeah, and then if it could just like turn into a chicken leg or something, then I could just eat it. And
then it's like, stop biting me. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. It probably has to show up at first. You would think it would have to show up at first in its true form, right? It might not be thinking at first that it's appearing the way it's appearing, and then it goes, "Oh shit! I gotta appear to it as
But if they're like, I think of like that kind of stuff as not really having form. It has form so we can make sense of it.
Right.
We need form, right? They don't have, I don't think God has form or spirits really have form. They take form so we can understand that they're there.
Right. It doesn't think it has to be aesthetically pleasing, and then it remembers it has to be. I always think that it doesn't assume it has to be, and then it just assumes form. Yeah.
Just tries to make sense to it. My angel should be a cheesecake. I think I'm hungry.
I think you are too. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're getting dangerously close to dinner time.
A bucket of chicken and cheesecake. Well, that can be my angel.
Wow. It's never going to survive that first wish. No.
I'm going to eat it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Angels, you're in trouble. You're in so much trouble when you appear in front of Jess. Mine's probably going to show up looking like a porn star. I'm just saying. It's in real trouble when it shows up in front of me. Just saying. Yeah. Speaking of showing up looking like a model, there is a huge Jesus model boom out there.
Oh.
Remember yesterday I showed you a picture and you thought it was wrestling Jesus?
Yeah.
You weren't too far off from the truth.
So now there are models who look like Jesus. Like that's the new it thing.
That's the new
Jesus modeling Calvin Klein underwear.
You're not far off from the truth. There are Christ lookalikes out there making $200 an hour for posing for holiday cards.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Isn't it though? Take a look.
Yeah, brilliant.
Take a look at this guy. This guy's making $200 an hour.
Oh, wow. Jesus, look at you.
Look at that guy. $200 an hour for posing like that. I'm about to show you some pictures of some guys that you're going to be like, no effing way. Jesus saves, but his lookalikes are earning mountains of cash. Models who bear a strong resemblance to the Son of God are in an increasing demand, with Christians hiring them to pose for family portraits, wedding announcements, Christmas cards, and anything else that requires a divine presence. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, long hair and beards might seem undesirable in most workplaces, but they're mandatory in this unexpectedly booming industry where the divine doppelgangers can earn up to $200 an hour. Now, Jess, I'm going to show you this Jesus who's struck a yoga pose. Look at this guy.
Oh, Jesus, look at you. Jesus has a six-pack.
He does, doesn't he? Now, you wouldn't think you would get that on figs and other type Mideastern food, but take a look at that guy, huh?
Jesus is ripped.
He is, isn't he? That's you don't get that on yoga alone. I'm just saying.
How is he balancing in that tree? That's amazing in so many ways.
That is, isn't it? That is balance.
That's akin to walking on water.
A little bit. Bob Saggers, who stands in at 6'5", I don't think the real Jesus was that big, with a beard and shoulder-length mane, now models as the Messiah after being scouted at an indie music festival in Salt Lake City, Utah. Takes all kinds, I guess. He says, I make for a pretty tall Jesus, said Sagers, who's been posting as the religious figure for 4 years. But becoming the Savior isn't as simple as having a beard or the athletic body of Christ. Oftentimes, the models must don Jesus's robes and tote his staff as well as embody Christian characteristics. Jai Knighton, a professional model who's appeared as Jesus in various family portrait shoots.
Can you imagine? Come on, kids. We're just going to have a little family picture taken with Jesus.
I can't wrap my head around that. I can't. Come on, kids. Gather around. It's just us and Jesus.
Gather around this Jesus in a loincloth who's all ripped. This is mommy's version of Jesus.
It's okay. Jesus is glistening, but don't pay attention. It's okay. recalled one client telling him to be the most Christ-like person you can be, or people will be able to tell through the photos that it's not real.
Oh.
Oh, so you have to gather around the family but be Christ-like. So you can't
Good luck.
You can't seductively just grab mom while the rest of the family is.
Well, then what's the point? I don't need that model at my family picture. Never mind.
Meanwhile, lookalike Terry Holker's Methodist modeling was so convincing that a passerby seemingly thought he was the real deal. Okay, wait a minute. So,
one too many cups of eggnog, Tim.
Right. So Christ magically comes back to earth and you're the first one to see him.
Yeah. That makes sense.
At that moment, I'm pulling a holy shit and I'm getting my affairs in order. If I'm the first one to see him.
I'm like, have I been naughty or nice? Which one?
Jesus, you're back and I see you. I'm done at that point. At that point, I start placing my bets for the Vikings to win the Super Bowl. Because at that point, we're done as a society. The 50-year-old was reportedly doing a shoot in the Salt Flats when a woman approached him and asked if he could walk with her and hold her hand. That's
kind of sweet.
That is sweet. When Holker informed her he wasn't the real Jesus, she replied that she'd been looking for a sign of the Lord when driving by, and that's when she saw him. Oh,
I love that.
But the lookalike models aren't the only ones getting attention from the booming Jesus craze. 28-year-old Michaela Avalos said doing these heavenly photo ops caused her photography business to experience a biblical boom. In 2020, the Ogden-based snapper had reportedly hired a family friend to pose as the Good Shepherd with her kids to make it more personal. When she uploaded the photos online, Avalos was swamped with requests from people seeking similarly sanctified pictures and has now shot 50 to 60 groups in this fashion. However, she does warn prospective customers, if your kid doesn't like taking pictures on Santa's lap, he probably won't like this experience with Jesus either. Yeah.
Just a couple of crying kids with Jesus.
That's right. Yeah. Come on, kids, gather around Jesus, ignore the stigmata. It's okay. He's not bleeding for real.
He's only bleeding a little.
He died for your sins. Would you hold still? I'm just saying. Yeah. I could see that happening. So there you go. Oh, boy. All right. Let's see here. We have one more story here before we take a break, and then we'll get to our stories today. This has to do with the real-life Santa Claus and the heist of St. Nick. We'll get into our scary stories a little early.
Okay.
All right. This is a Christmas story that doesn't necessarily make it into the carols. It's a fact that's strange but true, but Santa Claus's corpse was stolen from its tomb. In fact, our good friend Josh Gates has covered it on his program. Though Christmas carols and claymation specials have for some reason neglected the heist of St. Nick's dead body, the details of that theft actually can tell us a lot about myth-making and the power of stories, however bizarre, to shape reality. Plus, it's just a good tale to tell at holiday parties. The gist of it is this. In 1087, two Italian cities, Venice and Bari, raced to be the first to steal the bones of St. Nicholas, known to us as Santa Claus, from a basilica in what is now southern Turkey. Why, you may ask? Well, because the corpse supposedly wept a magic liquor that would cure all ills if you drank it or rubbed it on your body.
Hey, no. That's disgusting. You're going to drink the juice out of a corpse.
You're not down with a little Santa liquor?
Just let me die, Tim.
You don't want a little Santa liqueur?
No, I do not. I do not want rotten corpse juice.
Little St. Nick tears for you?
Oh, gross.
No? A little chaser with that? No?
Mm-mm.
All right. St. Nicholas was a real catch. Forget everything you know about Santa Claus. Almost everything we associate with him, with the North Pole, the sled, the reindeer, is a 19th century confection laid on top of a much older and sterner figure. The historical Nicholas was Bishop of Myra, a merchant city on the turquoise coast at the edge of the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. He was supposedly imprisoned and tortured during the great persecution of the Emperor Diocletian. After his death, stories accumulated around him. He had fought demons. He had sniffed out a serial killer who was pickling boys in his meat locker. And no, that's not a double entendre for anything. Just saying. He had saved 3 girls from prostitution by throwing bags of gold through their window late at night. Oh, that's mighty white of him.
That was nice.
Yeah. A legend that is the origin of his role as a gift giver to children. And he had saved many sailors by flying through the sky to their aid during storms, calming the waves, trimming the sails, grasping the drowning by their hair, and teleporting them to land. You could see where the sled comes in, right?
Magical.
Yeah. For Venice and Bari, coastal cities on the eastern side of the boot in the north and south, respectively, and dependent on merchant ships arriving and departing from all over the known world, it would be invaluable to have a shrine devoted to St. Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors. Businessmen from all over Europe would choose your port to set out from if they knew they could kneel at the altar of this champion of mariners. It was the best of good luck, a guarantee of calm seas and a prosperous voyage. That was the thinking of a group of grain merchants on a routine run between Bari and the Syrian city of Antioch. Sitting around one blustery day, as they crossed the Mediterranean on their 3 ships, they discussed the idea of stealing the saint's bones when they passed Myra, where he was buried. It was a good time to do it. The Christian city located in present-day Turkey had just been invaded by the Seljuk Turks. The whole region was in turmoil. This was the time to slip in and steal the body. And why not? It turned out, however, that they were not the only ones with this bright idea. As they discussed it in the seaside taverns of Antioch, where they were loading their return cargo, some Venetian sailors overheard and boasted that they, in fact, were about to plunder the tomb. They had all the equipment at the ready, crowbars, shovels, and mallets. They were heading there on their way home to Italy. The Bari sailors had been a little anxious about stealing the corpse. He was a holy man, after all, and saints were supposed to hover around their relics. If you steal relics and the saint doesn't want to go with you, it's not a theft. It's technically a kidnapping. The fury of a maritime saint could lead to storms, maelstroms, krakens, and all sorts of disasters. But now that the Venetians had thrown down the gauntlet, all their reservations disappeared. Venice and Bari are great economic rivals, and Venice had been getting the upper hand with sweet trade deals and a powerful navy. Bari, the scrappy underdog, was determined to get its own back. So the 3 Bari's grain ships set out for Myra immediately, hoping to steal the body before the Venetians knew what was happening. It must have been an eerie sight when they anchored at Myra. Turkish and Turkmen raiders had swept down out of the mountains a couple of years before. The city itself was now deserted, all of its population huddled in a fortress up on a nearby hill, surrounded by the tombs of their ancestors. They were probably paying tribute to the Turks, some kind of protection money, but the truce was uneasy, and they rarely ventured out of the fortress. This meant, however, that only 4 monks guarded the tomb of St. Nicholas. Down in the city, carrying on in their ancient duties, filling decorative glass vials with the ooze that drizzled from his corpse. Just to read it, it's disgusting.
Growing up, it's so disgusting.
Magic tears, yeah. Cautiously, the Bari sailors assembled a task force of 47 who would march on the church, armed with swords for protection and sledgehammers for breaking into the tomb. A skeleton crew of 20-odd would stay behind and guard the 3 ships in case the Turks noticed them and got hostile. The Turks, according to one source, also worshipped at the tomb of Nicholas, They had been Islamized for only a few decades and apparently felt that a holy man was a holy man, regardless of his precise sect. For both Christians and the newly converted Turkish Muslims in the period, there was almost a shamanic magical property to the holy dead that went far beyond doctrine. When the Bariz thieves reached the walled compound that included the Nicholas Church and its abandoned monastery, they posted guards to watch the crossroads and make sure no one was coming to stop them. When the sailors went into the church, the four guardians assumed they were pilgrims, stopping off in the middle of a trade route to ask for a prosperous voyage and buy a vial of the Nick liquor. Nick liquor.
Oh, Nick liquor.
Yeah, you liquor, Nick. You brought her. After all, there were a couple of priests with them. It seemed likely enough that they were on a pilgrimage. It only took a few minutes, however, before the sailors' questions about where the body was stashed started to seem a little too pointed. Oh, here we go. Suspicious, one of the guardians demanded, "Why do you ask all these questions? Can it be that you want to take the body? Don't you know that we cannot possibly agree to such a thing? In fact, we would rather die than permit him to be taken." Oh, uh-oh.
The fight is on.
At first, the Bari crew tried lies. They claimed they'd actually been sent by the Pope to seize the body. And they tried bribery, 100 gold pieces for the bones. The guardians were horrified. St. Nicholas's body had lain under the floor of their church for 700 years. It defined the city of Myra. They weren't about to give up. So the thieves decided it was time to use force. This was a big step. They were in a holy place. They were worried about curses. Nonetheless, they grabbed the four guardians and tied them up. They sent men out into the courtyard to watch for resistance. And then in superstitious fear, they asked their own priests to sing a few chants, asking Nicholas for permission to steal him, to translate him in the term of art used by relic hunters everywhere. A young hothead named Matteo was sick of playing nice. He walked to the point in the floor where there was apparently a hole for drawing out the sacred oil, and he started battering it with his hammer. Soon other sailors were feeling bolder as they all joined in. They bashed apart the marble floor of the basilica and found under it a sarcophagus. There is some possibility that Nicholas's sarcophagus survives to this day with holes drilled in its scalloped lid to draw the oil out, and tellingly to pour holy oil in it. It appears that this was the method by which the oil was renewed. The guardians of the body were pressing their own olive oil in the compound, infusing it with local myrrh, and pouring it through a siphon into the sarcophagus, where it would be irradiated by the holiness of the sacred bones, and they could be packaged for resale. Matteo smashed the lid of the sarcophagus. The sailors found that the whole box was welling with dark oil. Unfazed, Matteo dunked his arms into the oil and felt around for bones. He was frustrated. He couldn't find the skull, which was obviously the real get. To the horror of everyone who looked on, he lowered himself into the bath of oil, drenched his clothes in sacred ichor, and fumbled around, feeling for the saint's head. Modern investigation of the bones suggests that in the process, he almost certainly shattered the ribs and pelvis, which he must have been kneeling on. When, Matteo found the skull, he handed it up, and the two priests connected to the heist, carefully lay it on a cloak to be folded up with the other long bones. As quickly as possible, the crew wrapped up their ill-gotten gains and made for the exit as the four guardians wailed pleas and threats and curses behind them. The armed band walked back through the deserted city of Myra towards their ships. They would have gotten there without incident, except, of course, there's no honor among thieves. They stopped to argue about whose ship should actually carry the corpse. While they argued, one of the guardians somehow made his way up to the fortress where the Christian population of Myra hid and sounded alarms. The people of Myra had suffered enough. Their city had been overrun. They'd been locked up in the fortress for a year, maybe longer, paying tribute so they could at least go out in the day to tend their fields or whatever livestock was left. And now their saint, their city's one claim to fame, was being carried off by some hooligans from the heel of the Italian boot. They poured out of their fortress and charged down through the streets of the city, screaming in rage. At this, the Bari sailors picked up the pace, trotting out towards their ship. which were pulled up on shore to the south of the city. The bones, wrapped in a bundle like Santa Claus's bag of toys, slapped up and down on the back of the priest who carried them, drizzling grease down his back. Ew, that's Saint Nick going down his back.
You know how bad that would smell? That guy that like went in with the corpse and he was like swimming in it.
Yeah.
It's like a horror movie, Tim.
I know. That's fun. The townspeople reached the ships too late. The crew had already scampered aboard. The people of Myra demanded the bones back. They wailed in sorrow that their city saint was about to sail away to foreign lands. Some even cursed Nicholas himself, the father of the city, for abandoning his children. But nothing would persuade the thieves. They pushed off and started to row toward open waters. Men and women plunged into the sea behind them, grabbing at the ship's oars. Back on shore, they found one of the holy guardians and blamed him for letting the Italians snatch the saint. They began to beat him to death on the shore. But the ships were getting farther away. The Bari sailors were almost mocking as they pulled away from Myra. They would not have an easy voyage home. Some of the sailors themselves would steal joints and fragments of the saint, a transgression that, as they believe, caused them to suffer through storms and almost capsize. But the saint was theirs. They drove a hard bargain when they got home to Bari. All of them were to get a cut of the pilgrim income from those who came to pray to the saint. This is one of the reasons we know about this heist. Not only do we have a couple of narratives written a few weeks or months after they got back to Bari, but we have a full financial account of the annual payments still being made to their family 80 years later. Bari's bid for pilgrim traffic worked. A decade after the heist in the mid-1090s, the Emperor of Byzantium, frustrated at the Turkish invasion of his lands to the east, including the region around Myra, asked the kings of Western Europe to send armies to assist him in pushing back the Seljuk Turks. The barbarian monarchs of the West sent hordes east, a counter-invasion we call the First Crusade. It was the beginning of 2 centuries of senseless bloodshed in the Middle East that forever tainted Muslim-Christian relations, a series of disastrous massacres and incompetent defeats that still swells the hearts of contemporary white supremacists with pride. And many of the expeditions set out from Bari, where the soldiers could pray to Nicholas for calm seas and a prosperous voyage. The city thrived as invasion forces supplied them at the merchant stalls of the port of St. Nicholas and set forth on their mission of destruction. And what about the Venetians, the city's great rivals? What happened when they got to Myra and demanded the bones? Well, that's a story for another Christmas. And there you go.
That was quite a story, Tim. It was really nasty.
The story of St. Nicholas's bones.
Yeah.
All right.
Good history lesson.
Good history lesson. So when we come back, we'll get into some Victorian Christmas stories. And we'll tell you, first off, about Horror, a True Tale. Victorian Christmas story when we get back. Right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is a Victorian Christmas on Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Right over there, my co-host, Jessica Freeburg. We're known as Santa and Mrs. Claus today on Christmas Day. Hope you're having a good Christmas.
Ho, ho,
ho. Ho, ho, ho. Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas today. So tradition, Jess, on Christmas, or traditional Victorian Christmas, is that we tell a ghost story, right? Or 2 or 3 or more on Christmas. And so today we've decided that we're going to tell our share of ghost stories, right? So I've picked a couple or more of time depending, and I'll let you decide, Jess, on how many Christmas stories we tell today.
Okay.
The first one is from John Berwick Harwood. It's called Horror, a True Tale. Now, 18th century novelists frequently presented their fiction as true accounts, so actual memoirs, in an attempt to raise the novel form from its then sordid status. So similarly, authors of 19th century ghost tales sought to provide the authentic ghost story experience, even when the tale's credentials were dubious at best. In this case, the story's subtitle, A True Tale, offers readers a chance to enjoy someone else's uncanny experience, made all the more tantalizing by its promise of authenticity. While this eerie story was published anonymously, it has been attributed to John Berwick Harwood, who lived during the years of 1829 to 1899, who was certainly not an heiress of 19. He wrote other ghost stories, and he contributed Picking Up a Pocketbook, which is a rousing story of a bank clerk engaged in an American adventure, to the 1861 Christmas number for Dickens's All the Year Round Horror, A True Tale. Horror, A True Tale first appeared in the January 1861 issue of Blackwood's magazine. So I'm trying to do the quick math here, Jess. This story is how old?
I don't number, Tim, so I cannot help you with that.
You don't number?
No.
Well, by gosh, it's got to be... Okay, so it's 160 years old?
That sounds right.
Yeah, 160, 170 years old. It's pretty old. Let me put it that way. All right. All right, so here goes. I was but 19 years of age when the incident occurred, which has thrown a shadow over my life. And ah me, how many and many a weary year has dragged by since then. Young, happy, and beloved I was in those long-departed days. They said I was beautiful. The mirror now reflects a haggard old woman with ashen lips and face of deadly pallor. But do not fancy that you are listening to a mere puling lament. It is not the flight of years that has brought me to be this wreck of my former self. Had it been so, I could have borne this or the loss cheerfully, patiently, as the common lot of all. But it was no natural progress of decay which has robbed me of the bloom, of youth, of the hopes and joys that belong to youth, snapped the link that bound my heart to another's, and doomed me to a lone old age. I try to be patient, but my cross has been heavy, and my heart is empty and weary, and I long for the death that comes so slowly to those who pray to die. Well, pretty cheery so far.
Rather depressing, actually.
Yeah, well, it gets better.
Carry on.
I will try and relate exactly as it happened, the event which blighted my life. Though it occurred many years ago, there is no fear that I should have forgotten any of the minutest circumstances. They were stamped on my brain too clearly and burningly, like the brand of a red-hot iron. I see them written in the wrinkles of my brow, in the dead whiteness of my hair, which was a glossy brown once, and has known no gradual change from dark to gray, from gray to white, as with those happy ones who were the companions of my girlhood, and whose honored age is soothed by the love of children and grandchildren. But I must not envy them. I only meant to say that the difficulty of my task has no connection with want of memory. I remember but too well. But as I take the pen, my hand trembles, my head swims. The old rushing faintness and horror comes over me again, and the well-remembered fear is upon me. Yet I will go on. This briefly is my story. I was a great heiress, I believe, though I cared little for the fact, but so it was. My father had great possessions, and no son to inherit after him. His 3 daughters, of whom I was the youngest, were to share the broad acres among them. I have said and truly that I cared little for this circumstance, and indeed I was so rich then in health and youth and love that I felt myself quite indifferent to all else. The possession of all the treasures of earth could never have made up for what I had then and lost, as I am about to relate. Of course, we girls knew that we were heiresses, but I do not think Lucy and Minnie were any the prouder or the happier on that account. I know I was not. Reginald did not court me for any money. Of that I felt assured. He proved it, heaven be praised, when he shrank from my side after the change. Yes, in all my lonely age, I can still be thankful that he did not keep his word, as some would have done. Did not clasp at the altar a hand he had learned to loathe and shudder at, because it was full of gold, much gold. At least he spared me that. And I know that I was loved, and the knowledge he has kept me from going mad through many a weary day and restless night, when my hot eyeballs had not a tear to shed, and even to weep was a luxury denied me. Our house was an old Tudor mansion. My father was very particular in keeping the smallest peculiarities of his home unaltered. Thus the many peaks and gables, the numerous turrets, and the mullioned windows with their quaint lozenge panes set in lead remained very nearly as they had been 3 centuries back. Over and above the quaint melancholy of our dwelling, with the deep woods of its park and the sullen waters of the mere, our neighborhood was thinly peopled and primitive, and the people around us were ignorant and tenacious of ancient ideas and traditions. Thus it was a superstitious atmosphere that we children were reared in, and we heard from our infancy countless tales of horror, some mere fables doubtless, others legends of dark deeds of the olden times, exaggerated by credulity and the love of the marvelous. Our mother had died when we were young, and our other parent being, though a kind father, much absorbed in affairs of various kinds. As an active magistrate and landlord, there was no one to check on the unwholesome stream of tradition which our plastic minds were inundated in the company of nurses and servants. As years went on, however, the old ghostly tales partially lost their effects, and our undisciplined minds were turned more towards balls, dress, and partners, and other matters airy and trivial, more welcome to our riper age. It was at a country assembly that Reginald and I first met and loved. Yes, I am sure that he loved me with all his heart. It was not as deep a heart as some. I have thought in my grief and anger, but I never doubted its truth and honesty. Reginald's father and mine approved of our growing attachment, and as for myself, I know I was happy then, that I look back upon those fleeting moments as on some delicious dream. I now come to the change. I have lingered on my childish reminiscence, my bright and happy youth, and now I must tell the rest, the blight and the sorrow. It was Christmas, always a joyful and hospitable time in the country, especially in such an old hall as our home, where quaint customs and frolics were much clung to, as part and parcel of the very dwelling itself. The hall was full of guests, so full, indeed, that there was great difficulty in providing sleeping accommodation for all. Several narrow and dark chambers in the turrets, mere pigeonholes, as we were irreverently called what had been thought good enough for the stately gentlemen of Elizabeth's reign, were now allotted to bachelor visitors, after having been empty for a century. At the spare rooms in the body and wings of the hall were occupied, of course, and the servants who had been brought down were lodged at the farm and at the keeper's, so great was the demand for space. At last, the unexpected arrival of an elderly relative, who had been asked months before but scarcely expected, caused great commotion. My aunts went about wringing their hands distractedly. Lady Speldhurst was a personage of some consequence. She was a distant cousin, and had been for years on cool terms with all of us, on account of some fancied affront or slight which she had paid her last visit, about the time of my christening. She was 70 years old. She was infirm, rich, and testy. Moreover, she was my godmother, though I had forgotten the fact. But it seems that though I had formed no expectations of a legacy in my favor, my aunts had done so for me. Aunt Margaret was especially eloquent on the subject. "There isn't a room left," she said. "Was everything so unfortunate? We cannot put Lady Speldhurst into the turrets, and yet where is she to sleep? And Rosa's godmother, too. Poor dear child, how dreadful! After all these years of estrangement, and with 100,000 in funds, and no comfortable warm room at her own unlimited disposal. And Christmas, of all times of the year. What was to be done? My aunts could not resign their own chambers to Lady Speldhurst, because they had already given them up to some of the married guests. My father was the most hospitable of men, but he was rheumatic, gouty, and methodical. His sisters-in-law dared not propose to shift his quarters, and indeed he would have far sooner dined on prison fare than have been translated to a strange bed. The matter ended in giving up my room. I had a strange reluctance to making the offer, which surprised myself. Was it a boding of evil to come? I cannot say. We are strangely and wonderfully made. It may have been, at any rate. I do not think it was any selfish unwillingness to make an old and infirm lady comfortable by a trifling sacrifice. I was perfectly healthy and strong. The weather was not cold for the time of year. It was a dark, moist Yule, not a snowy one. Though snow brooded overhead in the darkling clouds, I did make the offer, which became me, I said with a laugh as the youngest. My sisters laughed too and made a jest of my evident wish to propitiate my godmother. She is a fairy godmother, Rosa, said Minnie, and you know she was affronted at your christening and went away muttering vengeance. Here she is coming back to see you. I hope she brings golden gifts with her. I thought little of Lady Speldhurst and her possible golden gifts. I cared nothing for the wonderful fortune in the funds that my aunts whispered and nodded about so mysteriously. But since then, I have wondered whether, had I shown myself peevish or obstinate, had I refused to give up my room for the expected kinswoman, it would not have altered the whole of my life. But then Lucy or Minnie would have offered in my stead and been sacrificed. What do I say? Better than the blow should have fallen as it did than on those dear ones. The chamber to which I removed was a dim little triangular room in the western wing, and was only to be reached by traversing the picture gallery or by mounting a little flight of stone stairs which led directly upwards from the low-browed arch of a door that opened into the garden. There was one more room on the same landing place, and this was a mere receptacle for broken furniture, shattered toys, and all the lumber that would accumulate in a country house. The room I was to inhabit for a few nights was a tapestry-hung apartment with faded green curtains of some costly stuff, contrasting oddly with the new carpet and the bright, fresh hangings of the bed, which had been hurriedly erected. The furniture was half odd, half new, and on the dressing table stood a very quaint oval mirror in a frame of black wood, unpolished ebony, I think. I can remember the very pattern of the carpet, the number of chairs, the situation of the bed, the figures on the tapestry. Nay, I can recollect not only the color of the dress I wore on that fatal evening, but the arrangement of every scrap of lace and ribbon, of every flower, every jewel, with a memory but too perfect. Scarcely had my maid finished spreading out my various articles of attire for the evening when there was to be a great dinner party, when the rumble of a carriage announced that Lady Speldhurst had arrived. The short winter's day drew to a close, and a large number of guests were gathered together in the ample drawing room around the blaze of the wood fire after dinner. My father, I recollect, was not with us at first. There were some squires of the old hard-riding, hard-drinking stamp still lingering over their port in the dining room, and the host, of course, could not leave them. But the ladies and all the younger gentlemen, both those who slept under our roof and those who would have a dozen miles of fog and mire to encounter on their road home, were all together. Need I say that Reginald was there? He sat near me, my accepted lover, my plighted future husband. We were to be married in the spring. My sisters were not far off. They, too, had found eyes that sparkled and softened in meeting theirs, had found hearts that beat responsive to their own. And in their cases, no rude frost nipped the blossom ere it became the fruit. There was no canker in their flowerets of young hope, no cloud in their sky. Innocent and loving, they were beloved by men worthy their esteem. The room, a large and lofty one, with an arched roof, had somewhat of a somber character from being wainscoted and sealed with polished black oak of a great age. There were mirrors, and there were pictures on the walls, and handsome furniture, and marble chimney pieces, and a gay tournay carpet. But these merely appeared as bright spots on the dark background of the Elizabethan woodwork. Many lights were burning, but the blackness of the walls and the roof seemed absolutely to swallow up their rays, like the mouth of a cavern. 100 candles could not have given that apartment the cheerful lightness of a modern drawing room, but the gloomy richness of the panels matched well with the ruddy gleam from the enormous wood fire, in which, crackling and glowing, now lay the mighty Yule log. Quite a blood-red luster poured forth from the fire, and quivered on the walls and the groined roof. We gathered round the vast antique hearth in a wide circle. The quivering light of the fire and candles fell upon us all, but not equally, for some were in shadow. I remember still how tall and manly and handsome Reginald looked that night, taller by the head than any there, and full of high spirits and gaiety. I too was in the highest spirits. Never had my bosom felt lighter, and I believe it was my mirth which gradually gained the rest, for I recollect what a blithe, joyous company was seemed. All save one, Lady Speldhurst, dressed in gray silk and wearing a quaint headdress, sat in her armchair, fancying the fire, very silent, with her hands and her sharp chin propped on a sort of ivory-handled crutch that she walked with, for she was lame, peering at me with half-shut eyes. She was a spare little old woman with very keen, delicate features of the French type. Her gray silk dress, her spotless lace, old-fashioned jewels, and prim neatness of array were very well suited to the intelligence of her face, with its thin lips and eyes of a piercing black undimmed by age. Those eyes made me uncomfortable, in spite of my gaiety, as they followed me with every movement with curious scrutiny. Still, I was very merry and gay. My sisters even wondered at my ever-ready mirth, which was almost wild in its excess. I have heard since then of the Scottish belief that those doomed to some great calamity become fey, and are never so disposed for merriment and laughter as just before the blow falls. If ever mortal was fey, then I was so on that evening. Still, though, I strove to shake it off. The pertinacious observation of old Lady Speldhurst's eyes did make an impression on me of a vaguely disagreeable nature. Others, too, noticed her scrutiny of me, but set it down as a mere eccentricity of a person always reputed whimsical, to say the least of it. However, this disagreeable sensation lasted about a few minutes. After a short pause, my aunt took her part in the conversation, but we found ourselves listening to a weird legend which the old lady told exceedingly well. One tale led to another. Everyone was called on in turn to contribute to the public entertainment, and story after story, always relating to demonology and witchcraft, succeeded. It was Christmas, the season for such tales, and the old room with its dusky walls and pictures and vaulted roof, drinking up the light so greedily, seemed just fitted to give effect to such legendary lore. The huge logs crackled and burnt with glowing warmth. The blood-red glare of the Yule log flashed on the faces of the listeners and narrator, on the portraits and the holly wreathed about their frames, and the upright old dame in her acquainted dress and trinkets, like one of the originals of the pictures, stepped from the canvas to join our circle. It threw a shimmering luster of an ominously ruddy hue upon the oaken panels. No wonder that the ghost and goblin stories had a new zest. No wonder that the blood of the more timid grew chill and curdled, that their flesh crept and their hearts beat irregularly, and the girls peeped fearfully over their shoulders and huddled close together like frightened sheep, and half fancied they beheld some impish and malignant face gibbering at them from the darkling corners of the old room. By degrees, my high spirits died out, and I felt the childish tremors, long latent, long forgotten, coming over me. I followed each story with painful interest. I did not ask myself if I believed the dismal tales. I listened, and fear grew over me. the blind, irrational fear of our nursery days. I'm sure most of the other ladies present, young or middle-aged, were affected by the circumstances under which these traditions were heard, no less by the wild and fantastic character of them. But with them, the impression would die out the next morning, when the bright sun should shine on the frosted boughs, and the rime on the grass, and the scarlet berries and green spikelets on the holly. And with me, but what was to happen ere another day dawn? Before we had made an end of this talk, my father and the other squires came in, and we ceased our ghost stories, ashamed to speak of such matters before these newcomers, hard-headed, unimaginative men who had no sympathy with idle legends. There was now a stir and bustle. Servants were handing around tea and coffee and other refreshments. Then there was a little music and singing. I sang a duet with Reginald, who had a fine voice and good musical skill. I remember that my singing was much praised, and indeed I was surprised at the power and pathos of my own voice, doubtless due to my excited nerves and mind. Then I heard someone say to another that I was by far the cleverest of the squire's daughters, as well as the prettiest. It did not make me vain. I had no rivalry with Lucy and Minnie, but Reginald whispered some soft, fond words in my ear a little before he mounted his horse to set off homewards, which did make me happy and proud. And to think that the next time we met, but I forgave him long ago. Poor Reginald, and now shawls and cloaks were in request, and carriages rolled up to the porch, and the guests gradually departed. At last, no one was left but those visitors staying in the house. Then my father, who had been called out to speak with the bailiff of the estate, came back with a look of annoyance on his face. "A strange story I've just been told," said he. "Here has been my bailiff to inform me of the loss of 4 of the choicest ewes out of that little flock of Southdowns I set such store by, and which arrived in the north but 2 months since. And the poor creatures have been destroyed in so strange a manner, for their carcasses are horribly mangled." Most of us uttered some expression of pity or surprise, and some suggested that a vicious dog was probably the culprit. "It would seem so," said my father. "It certainly seems the work of a dog. And yet all the men agree that no dog of such habits exists near us, where indeed dogs are scarce, excepting the shepherd's collies and the sporting dogs secured in yards. Yet the sheep are gnawed and bitten, for they show the marks of teeth. Something has done this and has torn the bodies wolfishly. But apparently it has been only to suck the blood, for little or no flesh is gone." "How strange!" cried several voices. Then some of the gentlemen remembered to have heard of cases when dogs addicted to sheep killing had destroyed whole flocks, as if in sheer wantonness, scarcely deigning to taste a morsel of each slain wether. My father shook his head. "I have heard of such cases too," he said, "but in this instance I am tempted to think of the malice of some unknown enemy has been at work. The teeth of a dog have been busy, no doubt, but the poor sheep have been mutilated in a fantastic manner, as strange as horrible. Their hearts, in especial, have been torn out and left at some paces off, half gnawed. Also, the men persist that they found the print of a naked human foot in the soft mud of the ditch, and near it, this." And he held up what seemed to be a broken link of a rusted iron chain. Many were the ejaculations of wonder and alarm, and many and shrewd the conjectures, but none seemed exactly to suit the bearings of the case. And when my father went on to say that the 2 lambs of the same valuable breed had perished in the same singular manner 3 days previously, and that they were also found mangled and gore-stained, the amazement reached a higher pitch. Old Lady Speldhurst listened with calm, intelligent attention, but joined in none of our exclamations. At length she said to my father, "Try and recollect. Have you no enemy among your neighbors?" My father started and knit his brows. "No one that I know of," he replied, and indeed he was a popular man and a kind landlord. "The more lucky you," said the old dame, with one of her grim smiles. It was now late and we retired to rest before long. One by one, the guests dropped off. I was the member of the family selected to escort old lady Speldhurst to her room, the room I had vacated to her favor. I did not much like the office. I felt a remarkable repugnance to my godmother, but my worthy aunts insisted so much that I should ingratiate myself with one who had so much to leave, that I could not but comply. The visitor hobbled up to the broken oaken stairs actively enough, propped up on my arm and her ivory crutch. The room never had looked more genial and pretty, with its brisk fire, modern furniture, and gay French paper on the walls. "A nice room, my dear, and I ought to be much obliged to you for it, since my maid tells me it's yours," said her ladyship. "But I am pretty sure you repent your generosity to me after all those ghost stories, and tremble to think of a strange bed and chamber, eh?" I made some commonplace reply. The old lady arched her eyebrows. "Where have they put you, child?" she asked. "In some cockloft of the turrets, eh? Or in a lumber room? A regular ghost trap? I can hear your heart beating with fear this moment. You are not fit to be alone." I tried to call up my pride and laugh off the accusation against my courage, all the more, perhaps because I felt its truth. "Do you want anything more that I can get you, Lady Speldhurst?" I asked, trying to feign a yawn of sleepiness. The old dame's keen eyes were upon me. "I rather like you, my dear," she said, "and I liked your mamma well enough before she treated me so shamefully about the christening dinner. Now I know you are frightened and fearful, and if an owl should but flap your window tonight, it might drive you into fits. There's a nice little sofa bed in this dressing closet. Call your maid to arrange it for you, and you can sleep there, snugly, under the old witch's protection. And then no goblin dare harm you, and nobody will be a bit the wiser, or quiz you for being afraid." How little I knew what hung in the balance of my refusal or acceptance of that trivial proffer. Had the veil of the future been lifted for one instant, but that veil is impenetrable to our gaze. Yet perhaps she had a glimpse of the dim vista beyond, she who made the offer, for when I declined with an affected laugh, she said in a thoughtful, half-abstracted manner, "Well, well, we must all take our own way through life. Good night, child. Pleasant dreams." And I softly closed the door. As I did so, she looked around at me rapidly with a glance I've never forgotten, half malicious, half sad, as if she had divined the yawning gulf that was to devour my young hopes. It may have been more eccentricity, the odd fantasy of a crooked mind, the whimsical conduct of a cynical person, triumphant in the power of an affrightening youth and beauty. Or, I have since thought, it may have been that the singular guest possessed some such gift as the Highland second sight, a gift vague, sad, and useless to the possessor, but sufficient to convey a dim sense of coming evil and boding doom. And yet, had she really known what was in store for me, what lurked behind the veil of the future, not even that arid heart could have remained impassive to the cry of humanity. She must have snatched me back, even from the edge of the black pit of misery. But doubtless she had not the power. Doubtless she had but a shadowy presentiment, at any rate, of some harm to happen, and could not see, save darkly, into the viewless void where the wisest stumble. I left her door. As I crossed the landing, a bright gleam came from another room, whose door was left ajar. It, the light, fell like a bar of golden sheen across my path. As I approached, the door opened, and my sister Lucy, who had been watching for me, came out. She was already in a white cashmere wrapper, over which her loosened hair hung darkly and heavily like tangles of silk. "Rosa, love," she whispered, "Minnie and I can't bear the idea of your sleeping out there, all alone, in that solitary room. The very room, too, Nurse Sherrard used to talk about. So, as you know, Minnie has given up her room and come to sleep in mine. Still, we should wish you to stop with us tonight at any rate, and I could make up a bed on the sofa for you, for myself or you, and I stopped Lucy's mouth with a kiss. I declined her offer. I would not listen to it. In fact, my pride was up in arms, and I felt I would rather pass the night in the church yard myself, or itself, than accept a proposal dictated. I felt sure by the notion that my nerves were shaken by the ghostly lore we had been raking up, that I was a weak, superstitious creature, unable to pass a night in a strange chamber. So I would not listen to Lucy, but kissed her, bade her good night, and went on my way laughing to show my light heart. Yet as I looked back in the dark corridor and saw a friendly door still ajar, the yellow bar of light still crossing from wall to wall, the sweet, kind face still peering after me from amid its clustering curls, I felt a thrill of sympathy, a wish to return, and a yearning after human love and companionship. False shame was strongest and conquered. I waved a gay adieu. I turned the corner, and peeping over my shoulder, I saw a door close. The bar of yellow light was there no longer, in the darkness of the passage. I thought at that instant that I heard a heavy sigh. I looked sharply around, and no one was there. No door was open, yet I fancied, with a wonderful vividness, that I did hear an actual sigh breathed not far off, and plainly distinguishable from the groan of the sycamore branches as the wind tossed them to and fro in the outer blackness. If ever a mortal's good angel had cause to sigh for sorrow, not sin, mine had cause to mourn that night. But imagination plays us strange tricks, and my nervous system was not overcomposed or very fitted for judicial analysis. I had to go through the picture gallery. I had never entered this apartment by candlelight before, and I was struck by the gloomy array of the tall portraits, gazing moodily from the canvas on the lozenge-paned or painted windows, which rattled to the blast as it swept howlingly by. Many of the faces looked stern, and very different from their daylight expression. In others, a furtive, flickering smile seemed to mock me as my candle illuminated them. And in all, the eyes, as usual with artistic portraits, seemed to follow my motions with a scrutiny and an interest the more marked for the apathetic immovability of the other features. I felt ill at ease under their stony gaze, though conscious how absurd were my apprehensions, and I called up a smile and an air of mirth, more as if acting a part under the eyes of human beings than of their mere shadows on the wall. I even laughed as I confronted them. No echo had my short-lived laughter, but from the hollow armor and arching roof, as I continued on my way in silence. I have spoken of the armor. Indeed, there was a fine collection of plate and mail, for my father was an enthusiastic antiquary. In especial, there were 2 suits of black armor, erect and surmounted by helmets with closed visors, which stood as if 2 mailed champions were guarding the gallery and its treasures. I had often seen these, of course, but never by night, and never when my whole organization was overwrought and tremulous as it was then. As I approached the Black Knights, as we had dubbed them, a wild notion seized on me that the figures moved, that men were concealed in the hollow shells which had once been born in battle and tourney. I knew the idea was childish, yet I approached in irrational alarm and fancied I absolutely beheld eyes glaring on me from the eyelet holes in the visors. I passed them by, and then my excited fancy told me that the figures were following me with stealthy strides. I heard a clatter of steel, caused, I'm sure, by some more violent gust of wind sweeping the gallery through the crevices of the old windows. With a smothered shriek, I rushed to the door, opened it, darted out, and clapped it to with a bang that re-echoed through the whole wing of the house. Then, by a sudden and not uncommon revulsion of feeling, I shook off my aimless terrors, blushed at my weakness, and sought my chamber only too glad that I had only been witness to my late tremors. As I entered my chamber, I thought I heard something stir in the neglected lumber room, which was the only neighboring apartment. But I was determined to have no more panics, and resolutely shut my ears to this slight and transient noise, which had nothing unnatural in it. For surely, between rats and wind, an old manor house on a stormy night needs no sprites to disturb it. So I entered my room and rang for my maid. As I did so, I looked around me, and a most unaccountable repugnance to my temporary abode came over me. In spite of my efforts, it was no more to be shaken off than a chill is to be shaken off when we enter some damp cave. And rely upon it, the feeling of dislike and apprehension with which we regard, at first sight, certain places and people was not implanted in us without some wholesome purpose. I grant it is irrational, mere animal instinct, but it is not instinct God's gift, as it is for us to despise it. It is but instinct that children know their friends from their enemies, that they distinguish with such unerring accuracy between those who like them and those who only flatter and hate them. Dogs do the same. They will fawn on one person, they slink snarling from another. Show me a man whom children and dogs shrink from, and I will show you a false bad man, lips on his lips, and murder at his heart. No, let none despise the heaven-sent gift of an innate antipathy, which makes the horse quail when the lion crouches in the thicket, which makes the cattle scent the shambles from afar, and low in terror and disgust as their nostrils snuff the blood-polluted air. I felt this antipathy strongly as I looked around me in my new sleeping room, and yet I could find no reasonable pretext for my dislike. A very good room it was, after all, now that the green damask curtains were drawn, the fire burning bright and clear, candles burning on the mantelpiece, and the various familiar articles of toilet arranged as usual. The bed, too, looked peaceful and inviting. A pretty white little bed, not at all the gaunt funeral sort of couch which haunted apartments generally contain. My maid entered and assisted me to lay aside the dress and ornaments I had worn, and arrange my hair as usual, prattling the while in Abigail fashion. I seldom cared to converse with servants, but on that night, a sort of dread of being left alone, a longing to keep some human being near me, possessed me, and I encouraged the girl to gossip, so that her duties took her half an hour longer to get through than usual. At last, however, she had done all that could be done, and all my questions were answered, and my orders for the morrow reiterated and vowed obedience to, and the clock on the turret struck 1. Then Mary, yawning a little, asked if I wanted anything more, and I obliged to answer no, for very shame's sake, and she went. The shutting of the door, gently as it was closed, affected me unpleasantly. I took a dislike to the curtains, the tapestry, the dingy pictures, everything. I hated the room. I felt a temptation to put on a cloak, run, half-dressed to my sister's chambers, and say I'd changed my mind and come for shelter. But they must be asleep, I thought, and I could not be so unkind as to wake them. I said my prayers with unusual earnestness and a heavy heart. I extinguished the candles, and I was just about to lay my head on the pillow when the idea seized me that I would fasten the door. The candles were extinguished, but the firelight was amply sufficient to guide me. I gained the door. There was a lock, but it was rusty or hampered. My utmost strength could not turn the key. The bolt was broken and worthless. Balked of my intention, I consoled myself by remembering that I had never had need of fastenings yet, and returned to my bed. I lay awake for a good while, watching the red glow of the burning coals in the grate. I was quiet now, and more composed. Even the light gossip of the maid, full of petty human cares and joys, had done me good. Diverted my thoughts from brooding, I was on the point of dropping asleep when I was twice disturbed, once by an owl hooting on the ivy outside, no unaccustomed sound, but harsh and melancholy, once by a long mournful howling set up by the mastiff, chained in the yard beyond the wing I occupied. A long-drawn, lugubrious howling was this latter, and much such a note as the vulgar declare to herald a death in the family. This was a fancy I had never shared, but yet I could not help feeling that the dog's mournful moans were sad and expressive of terror, not at all like his fierce, honest barking of anger, but rather as if something evil and unwanted were abroad. But soon I fell asleep. How long had I slept, I never knew. I awoke at once with that abrupt start, which we all know well, and which carries us in a second from utter unconsciousness to the full use of our faculties. The fire was still burning, but was very low, and half the room or more was in deep shadow. I knew I felt that some person or thing was in the room, although nothing unusual was to be seen by the feeble light. Yet it was a sense of danger that had aroused me from my slumber. I experienced, while yet asleep, the chill and shock of a sudden alarm. And I knew, even in the act of throwing off sleep like a mantle, why I awoke, and that some intruder was present. Yet, though listened intently, no sound was audible, except the faint murmur of the fire, the dropping of a cinder from the bars, the loud irregular beatings of my own heart. Notwithstanding the silence, by some intuition I knew I had not been deceived by a dream, and felt certain that I was not alone. I waited. My heart beat on. Quicker, more sudden grew its pulsations, as a bird in a cage might flutter in presence of the hawk. And then I heard a sound, faint, but quite distinct, the clank of iron, the rattling of a chain. I ventured to lift my head from the pillow. Dim and uncertain as the light was, I saw the curtains of my bed shake and caught a glimpse of something beyond, a darker spot in the darkness. This confirmation of my fears did not surprise me so much as it shocked me. I strove to cry aloud but could not utter a word. The chain rattled again, and this time the noise was louder and clearer. But though I strained my eyes, they could not penetrate the obscurity that shrouded the other end of the chamber, whence came the sullen clanking. In a moment, several distinct trains of thought, like many colored strands of thread twining into one, became palpable to my mental vision. Was it a robber? Could it be a supernatural visitant? Or was I the victim of a cruel trick, such as I had heard of, and which some thoughtless person loved to practice on the timid reckless of its dangerous results? And then a new idea, with some ray of comfort in it, suggested itself. There was a fine young dog of the Newfoundland breed, a favorite of my father's, which was usually chained by night in an outhouse. Neptune might have broken loose, found its way into my room, and finding the door imperfectly closed, have pushed it open and entered. I breathed more freely as this harmless interpretation of the noise forced itself upon me. It must be the dog. As I was distressing myself uselessly, I resolved to call him. I strove to utter his name. Neptune, Neptune. But a secret apprehension restrained me, and I was mute. The chain then clanked nearer and nearer to the bed, and presently I saw a dusky, shapeless mass appear between the curtains on the opposite side to where I was lying. How I longed to hear the whine of the poor animal that I had hoped might be the cause of my alarm, but no, I heard no sound save the rustle of the curtains and the clash of the iron chain. Just then the dying flame of the fire leapt up, and with one sweeping, hurried glance, I saw the door that was shut, and horror, it's not the dog. It is the semblance of a human form that now throws itself heavily on the bed, outside the clothes, and lies there, huge and swart, in the red gleam that treacherously dies away from showing so much to affright, and it sinks into dull darkness. There was now no light left, though the red cinders yet glowed with a ruddy gleam like the eyes of wild beasts. The chain rattled no more. I tried to speak, to scream wildly for help. My mouth was parched. My tongue refused to obey. I could not utter a cry, and indeed, who could have heard me? Alone I was, in that solitary chamber with no living neighbor, and the picture gallery between me and any aid that even the loudest, most piercing shriek could summon. And the storm that howled without would have drowned out my voice, even if help had been at hand. To call aloud to demand who is there, alas, how useless, how perilous. If the intruder were a robber, my outcries would but goad him to fury. But what robber would act thus? As if a trick that seemed impossible. And yet what lay by my side, now wholly unseen? I strove to pray aloud as there rushed on my memory a flood of weird legends, the dreaded yet fascinating lore of my childhood. I had heard and read of the spirits of wicked men forced to revisit the scenes of earthly crimes, or demons that lurked in certain accursed spots of the ghoul and vampire of the East, stealing amid the graves they rifled for their ghostly banquets. And I shuddered as I gazed on the blank darkness where I knew it lay. It stirred, it moaned hoarsely, and again I heard the chain clank close beside me. So close that it must have almost touched me. I drew myself from it, shrinking away in loathing and terror of the evil thing. What I knew not, but felt that something malignant was near. And yet, in the extremity of my fear, I dared not speak. I was strangely cautious to be silent, even in moving farther off, for I had a wild hope that it, the phantom, the creature, whatever it was, had not discovered my presence in the room. And then I remembered all of the events of the night, Lady Spellhurst's ill-omened vaticinations, her half-warnings, her singular look as we parted, my sister's persuasions, my terror in the gallery, the remark that this was the room Nurse Sherrard used to talk of. And then memory, stimulated by fear, recalled the long-forgotten past, the ill repute of this disused chamber, the sins it had witnessed, the blood spilled, the poison administered by unnatural hate within its walls, the tradition which called it haunted, the green room. I remembered how fearfully the servants avoided it, how it was mentioned rarely and in whispers when we were children, and how it was regarded as a mysterious region unfit for mortal habitation. Was it the dark form with the chain, a creature of this world, or a specter? And again, more dreadful still, could it be that the corpses of wicked men were forced to rise and haunt in the body the places where they had wrought their evil deeds? And was such as these my grisly neighbor? The chain faintly rattled. My hair bristled. My eyeballs seemed starting from their sockets. The damps of a great anguish were on my brow. My heart labored as if I were crushed beneath some vast weight. Sometimes it appeared to stop its frenzied beatings. Sometimes its pulsations were fierce and hurried. My breath came short as with extreme difficulty, and I shivered as if with cold. Yet I feared to stir. It moved. It moaned. Its fetters clanked dismally. The couch creaked and shook. This was no phantom. Then no air-drawn specter, but its very solidity, its palpable presence were 1,000 times more terrible. I felt that I was in the very grasp of what could not only affright, but harm, of something whose contact sickened the soul with deathly fear. I made a desperate resolve. I glided from the bed. I seized a warm wrapper, threw it around me, and tried to grope with extended hands my way to the door. My heart beat high at the hope of escape, but I had scarcely taken one step before the moaning was renewed. It changed into a threatening growl that would have suited a wolf's throat, and a hand clutched at my sleeve. I stood motionless. The muttering growl sank to a moan again. The chain sounded no more, but still the hand held its gripe of my garment, and I feared to move. It knew my presence then. My brain reeled, the blood boiled in my ears, and my knees lost all strength. While my heart panted like that of a deer in the wolf's jaws, I sank back, and the benumbing influence of excessive terror reduced me to a state of stupor. When my full consciousness returned, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, shivering with cold and barefooted. All was silent, but I felt that my sleeve was still clutched by my unearthly visitant. The silence lasted a long time, then followed a chuckling laugh that froze my very marrow, and the gnashing of teeth as in demonic frenzy, and then a wailing moan, and this was succeeded by silence. Hours may have passed, nay, though the tumult of my own heart prevented my hearing the clock strike, must have passed, but they seemed ages to me. And how they were spent? Hideous visions passed before my aching eyes that I dared not close, but which gazed ever into the dumb darkness where it lay. My dread companion. Through the watches of the night, I pictured it in every abhorrent form which an excited fancy could summon up. Now a skeleton with hollow eye holes and grinning fleshless jaws. Now a vampire with livid face and bloated form, and now dripping mouth wet with blood. Would it never be light? And yet, when day would dawn, I should be forced to see it face to face. I had heard that specter and fiend were compelled to fade as morning brightened, but this creature was too real, too foul of a thing to earth, to vanish at cockcrow. No, I should see it, the horror, face to face. And then the cold prevailed, and my teeth chattered, and shiverings ran down me. And yet there was the damp of agony on my bursting brow. Some indistinct made me snatch at a shawl or cloak that lay on a chair within reach, and wrap it around me. The moan was renewed, and the chain just stirred. Then I sank into apathy, like an Indian at the stake, in the intervals of torture. Hours fled by, and I remained like a statue of ice, rigid and mute. I even slept, for I remembered that I started to find the cold gray light of an early winter's day was on my face, and stealing around the room from between the heavy curtains of the window, shuddering but urged by the impulse that rivets the gaze of the bird upon the snake, I turned to see the horror of the night. Yes, it was no fevered dream, no hallucination of sickness, no airy phantom, unable to face the dawn. In the sickly light, I saw it lying on the bed, with its grim head on the pillow. A man? Or a corpse arisen from its unhallowed grave and awaiting the demon that animated it? There it lay, a gaunt, gigantic form, wasted to a skeleton, half clad, foul with dust and clotted gore, its huge limbs flung upon the couch as if at random, its shaggy hair streaming all over the pillows like a lion's mane. Its face was towards me. Oh, the wild hideousness of that face, even in sleep. Its features was human, even though its horrid mask of mud and half-dried bloody gouts, but the expression was brutish and savagely fierce. The white teeth were visible between its parted lips in a malignant grin. The tangled hair and beard were mixed in leonine fashion and confusion, and there were scars disfiguring the brow. Round the creature's waist was a ring of iron, to which it was attached a heavy but broken chain. The chain I heard clanking. With a second glance, I noticed the part of the chain was wrapped in straw to prevent its galling the wearer. The creature, I cannot call it a man, had the marks of fetters on its wrist. The bony arm that protruded through one tattered sleeve was scarred and bruised. The feet were bare and lacerated by pebbles and briars, and one of them was wounded and wrapped in a morsel of a rag. And the lean hands, one of which held my sleeve, were armed with talons like an eagle's. In an instant, the horrid truth flashed upon me. I was in the grasp of a madman. Better the phantom that scares the sight than the wild beast that rends and tears the quivering flesh, the pitiless human brute that has no heart to be softened, no reason at whose bar to plead, no compassion, naught of man save the form and the cunning. I gasped in terror. Ah, the mystery of those ensanguined fingers, those gory wolfish jaws, that face all besmeared with blackening blood is revealed. The slain sheep so mangled and rent, the fantastic butchery, the print of the naked foot, all were explained. And the chain, the broken link of which was found near the slaughtered animals, it came from his broken chain, the chain he had snapped, doubtless in his escape from the asylum where his raging frenzy had been fettered and bound. In vain, in vain. Ah, me! How had this grisly Samson broken manacles and prison bars? How had he eluded guardian and keeper in a hostile world and come hither on his wild way, hunted like a beast of prey and snatching his hideous banquet like a beast of prey too? Yes, through the tatters of his mean and ragged garb, I could see the marks of the severities, cruel and foolish, with which men in that time tried to tame the might of madness, the scourge. Its marks were there, and the scars of the hard iron fetters, and many a cicatrice and welt that told a dismal tale of harsh usage. But now he was loose, free to play the brute, the baited, tortured brute that they had made him. Now without the cage, the ready to gloat over the victims his strength should overpower. Horror, horror! I was the prey, the victim, already in the tiger's clutch, and a deadly sickness came over me, and the iron entered into my soul, and I longed to scream, and was dumb. I died 1,000 deaths as that awful morning wore on. I dared not faint. But words cannot paint what I suffered as I waited till the moment when he should open his eyes and be aware of my presence, for I was assured he knew not. He had entered the chamber as a lair, when weary and gorged with his horrid orgy, and he had flung himself down to sleep without a suspicion that he was not alone. Even as he was grasping my sleeve, it was doubtless an act done betwixt sleeping and waking, like his unconscious moans and laughter in some frightful dream. Hours went on. Then I trembled as I thought that soon the house would be astir, that my maid would come to call me as usual and awake that ghastly sleeper. And might he not have time to tear me as he tore the sheep before any aid could arrive? At last, what I dreaded came to pass, a light footstep on the landing. There's a tap at the door. A pause succeeds, and then the tapping is renewed, and this time more loudly. Then the madman stretched his limbs and uttered his moaning cry, and his eyes slowly opened, very slowly opened, and met mine. The girl waited a while ere she knocked for the third time. I trembled lest she should open the door unbidden, see that grim thing, and by her idle screams and terror bring about the worst. Long before strong men could arrive, I knew that I should be dead. And what a death! The maid waited, no doubt surprised at my unusually sound slumbers, for I was in general a light sleeper and an early riser, but reluctant to deviate from habit by entering without permission. I was still alone with that thing in man's shape, but he was awake now, and I saw the wondering surprise in his haggard, bloodshot eyes. I saw him stare at me half vacantly, then with a crafty yet wondering look, and then I saw the devil of murder begin to peep forth from those hideous eyes, and the lips to part as in a sneer, and the wolfish teeth to bare themselves. But I was not what I had been. Fear gave me a new and a desperate composure, a courage foreign to my nature. I had heard of the best method to managing the insane. I could but try. I did try, calmly, wondering at my own feigned calm. I fronted the glare of those terrible eyes. Steady and undaunted was my gaze, motionless my attitude. I marveled at myself, but in that agony of sickening terror, I was outwardly firm. They sink, they quail unabashed, those dreadful eyes, before the gaze of a helpless girl, and the shame that is never absent from the insanity bears down the pride of strength, the bloody cravings of the wild beast. The lunatic moaned and drooped his shaggy head between his gaunt, squalid hands. I lost not an instant. I rose and with one spring reached the door, tore it open, and with a shriek rushed through, caught the wondering girl by the arm, and crying to her to run for her life, rushed like the wind along the gallery, down the corridor, down the stairs. Merry screams filled the house as she fled beside me, and I heard a long-drawn, raging cry, the roar of a wild animal, mocked of its prey, and I knew what was behind me. I never turned my head. I flew rather than ran. I was in the hall already. There was a rush of many feet, an outcry of many voices, a sound of scuffling feet and brutal yells, and oaths and heavy blows, and I fell to the ground, crying, "Save me!" and lay in a swoon. I awoke from a delirious trance. Kind faces were around my bed. Loving looks were bent on me by all. by my dear father and dear sisters, but I scarcely saw them before I swooned again. When I recovered from that long illness, through which I had been nursed so tenderly, the pitying looks I met made me tremble. I asked for a looking glass. It was long denied me, but my importunity prevailed at last. A mirror was brought. My youth was gone at one fell swoop. The glass showed me a livid and haggard face, blanched and bloodless, as of one who sees a specter, and in the ashen lips and wrinkled brow and dim eyes, I could trace nothing of my old self. The hair, too, jetty and rich before, was now as white as snow, and in one night the ravages of half a century had passed over my face. Nor have my nerves ever recovered their tone after their dire shock. Can you wonder that my life was blighted, that my lover shrank from me, so sad a wreck as I? I am old now, old and alone. My sisters would have had me to live with them, but I chose not to sadden their genial homes with my phantom face and dead eyes. Reginald married another. He has been dead many years. I never ceased to pray for him, though he left me when I was bereft of all. The sad weird is nearly over now. I am old and near the end, and wishful for it. I have not been bitter or hard, but I cannot bear to see many people, and am best alone. I try to do what good I can with the worthless wealth Lady Speldhurst left me, for at my wish, my portion was shared between my sisters. What need had I of inheritances? I, the shattered wreck, made by that one night of horror. The end.
Whoa.
I'm exhausted.
That was good. That was long. That was good.
That was long, wasn't it?
Yeah, what? It was giving me Bloody Bone vibes, like Rawhead.
Mm-hmm. So that was horror. A true tale.
Yeah, it was.
I've got a short one in the doll's ghost. You want to do a short one? And then I think we're done.
Yeah, we can do a short one.
Do a short one? Okay. We can do that one.
Can you do it? That was a lot of reading, sir.
I can do it. I can do one short one, and then I think we're done for the day. But Victorian ghost stories, by gosh, no wonder they're
so creepy.
They are creepy. So have you ever had
a lot of words? They like describe everything so well.
Yeah, they're definitely descriptive. That's for sure. I don't know. Do you have a favorite Christmas story? Ghost story?
I mean, Ella did the Christmas Carol several years, so we like that one.
Do you ever go to a Christmas Carol at the Guthrie?
Yeah, she was in it twice.
Oh, that's right. I forget. Yeah. You have actors in the family.
Yeah, it's a good one. We were saying we should go again just because it's so good. Have you seen it?
I have many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We have one last story here for you today. And then I think we're done for the day. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right. This one is from F. Marion Crawford. It's called The Doll's Ghost. Frances Marion Crawford wrote many short stories in the horror genre, the most famous being The Upper Berth, originally published in Unwin's Christmas Annual. The Italian-born American novelist, rated as one of the most popular at the end of the 19th century. While his tales of horror represent a small fraction of his writing, they're the most enduring work. So here we go. This one, by the way, in 1896, Crawford finds ghostly inspiration in a seemingly innocuous store-bought object, which is a child's toy.
Okay, you're bringing in the dolls. Let's go.
I'm bringing in the dolls. So here we go. It was a terrible accident, and for one moment, the splendid machinery of Cranston House got out of gear and stood still. The butler emerged from the retirement in which he spent his elegant leisure. Two grooms of the chambers appeared simultaneously from opposite directions. there were actually housemaids on the grand staircase, and those who remember the facts most exactly assert that Mrs. Pringle herself positively stood upon the landing. Mrs. Pringle was a housekeeper, and for the head nurse, the undernurse, and the nursery maid, their feelings cannot be described. The head nurse laid one hand upon the polished marble balustrade and stared stupidly before her. The undernurse stood rigid and pale, leaning against the polished marble wall, and the nursery maid collapsed and sat down upon the polished marble step just beyond the limits of the velvet carpet, and frankly burst into tears. The Lady Gwendolyn Lancaster Douglas Scroop, youngest daughter of the 9th Duke of Cranston and aged 6 years and 3 months, picked herself up quite alone and sat down on the 3rd step from the foot of the grand staircase in Cranston House. I love how they use the word ejaculated, by the way.
No, you had a few words in the last one that I was just sitting here thinking, like, I'm such a 12-year-old boy right now because I keep thinking cat things. It's your fault. I blame you.
You ready for another one?
Yeah.
Oh, ejaculated the butler. And he disappeared again. I would too if I just ejaculated on the butler.
And it's embarrassing, really, in front of everyone.
I know, right? Responded the grooms of the chamber as they took the ejaculate. No, I'm kidding. As they also went away. It's only that doll, Mrs. Pringle was distinctly heard to say in a tone of contempt. The undernurse heard her say it. Then the 3 nurses gathered round Lady Gwendolyn and patted her and gave her unhealthy things out of their pockets and hurried her out of Cranston House as fast as they could, lest it should be found upstairs that they had allowed the Lady Gwendolyn Lancaster Douglas Scroop to tumble down the grand staircase with her doll in her arms. And as the doll was badly broken, the nursery maid had carried it, with the pieces, wrapped up in Lady Gwendolyn's little cloak. It was not far to Hyde Park, and when they had reached a quiet place, they took means to find out that Lady Gwendolyn had no bruises, for the carpet was very thick and soft, and there was thick stuff under it to make it softer. Lady Gwendolyn Douglas Scroop sometimes yelled, but she never cried. It was because she had yelled that the nurses had allowed her to go downstairs alone with Nina, the doll, under one arm, while she steadied herself with the other hand on the balustrade, and trod upon the polished marble steps up beyond the edge of the carpet. So she had fallen, and Nina had come to grief. When the nurses were quite sure that she was not hurt, they unwrapped the doll and looked at her in her turn. She had been a very beautiful doll, very large and fair and healthy, with real yellow hair and eyelids that would open and shut over her very grown-up dark eyes. Moreover, when you moved her right arm up and down, she said, "Papa." And when you moved the left, she said, "Mama," very distinctly. Oh, I could do the voices too. You want me to do the voices?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. I heard her say, "Pa," when she fell, said the undernurse, who heard everything. But she ought to have said, "Papa." That's because her arm went up when she hit the step, said the head nurse. She'll say the other, "Pa," when I put it down again. "Pa," said Nina, as her right arm was pushed down, and speaking through her broken face, it was cracked right across from the upper corner of her forehead with a hideous gash through the nose and down to the little frilled collar of the pale green silk Mother Hubbard frock, and the 2 little 3-cornered pieces of porcelain had fallen out. "I'm sure it's a wonder she can speak at all, being all smashed," said the undernurse. "You have to take her to Mr. Puckler," said her superior. "It's not far, and you'd better go at once." Lady Gwendolyn was occupied in digging a hole in the ground with a little spade and paid no attention to the nurses. "What are you doing?" inquired the nursery maid, looking on. "Nina's dead, and I'm digging her grave," replied the ladyship thoughtfully. "Oh, she'll come to life again, all right," said the nursery maid. The undernurse wrapped Nina up again and departed. Fortunately, a kind soldier with very long legs and a very small cap happened to be there. And as he had nothing to do, he offered to see the undernurse safely to Mr. Puckler's and back. Mr. Bernard Puckler and his little daughter lived in a little house in a little alley, which led out of a quiet little street not far from Belgrave Square. He was the great doll doctor, and his extensive practice lay in the most aristocratic quarter. He mended dolls of all sizes and ages, boy dolls and girl dolls, baby dolls in long clothes, and grown-up dolls in fashionable gowns, talking dolls and dumb dolls, those that shut their eyes when they lay down, and those whose eyes had to be shut for them by means of a mysterious wire. His daughter Elsie was only just over 12 years old, but she was already very clever at mending dolls' clothes and at doing their hair, which is harder than you might think. Though the dolls sit quiet, still, while it is being done. Mr. Puckler had originally been a German, but he had dissolved his nationality in the ocean of London many years ago, like a great many foreigners. He had still had one or two German friends, however, who came on Saturday evenings and smoked with him and played piquet or scat with him for farthing points and called him Herr Doctor, which seemed to please Mr. Puckler very much. Herr Puckler. He looked older than he was, for his beard was rather long and ragged, his hair was grizzled and thin, and he wore horn-rimmed spectacles. As for Elsie, she was a thin, pale child, very quiet and neat, with dark hair and brown eyes that was plaited down her back and tied with a bit of black ribbon. She mended the dolls' clothes and took the dolls back to their homes when they were quite strong again. The house was a little one, but too big for the two people who lived in it. There was a small sitting room on the street, and the workshop was at the back, and there were 3 rooms upstairs. But the father and daughter lived most of their time in the workshop, because they were generally at work even in the evenings. Mr. Puckler laid Nina on the table and looked at her a long time, till the tears began to fill his eyes behind the horn-rimmed spectacles. He was a very susceptible man, and he often fell in love with the dolls he mended, and found it hard to part with them when they had smiled at him for a few days. They were very real little people to him, with characters and thoughts and feelings of their own, and he was very tender with them all. But some attracted him especially from the first, and when they were brought to him maimed and injured, their state seemed so pitiful to him that their tears came easily. You must remember that he had lived among dolls during a great part of his life and understood them. "How do you know that they feel nothing?" he went on to say to Elsie. "You must be gentle with them. It costs nothing to be kind to the little beings, and perhaps it makes a difference to them." And Elsie understood them because she was a child, and she knew that she was more to him than all the dolls. He fell in love with Nina at first, perhaps because of her beautiful brown glass eyes, that they were something like Elsie's own. And he loved Elsie first and best with all his heart. And besides, it was a very sorrowful case. Nina had evidently not been long in the world, for her complexion was perfect. Her hair was smooth where it should be smooth, and curly where it should be curly, and her silk clothes were perfectly new. But across her face was that frightful gash, like a saber cut, deep and shadowy within, but clean and sharp at the edges. Where he tenderly pressed her head to close the gaping wound, the edges made a fine grating sound that was painful to hear, and the lids of the dark eyes quivered and trembled as though Nina was suffering dreadfully. "Poor Nina," he exclaimed sorrowfully, "but I shall not hurt you much, though you will take a long time to get strong." He always asked the names of the broken dolls when they were brought to him, and sometimes the people knew what the children called them and told him. He liked Nina for a name. Altogether, and in every way, she pleased him more than any doll he had seen for many years, and felt drawn to her, and made up his mind to make her perfectly strong and sound, no matter how much labor it cost him. Mr. Puckler worked patiently, a little at a time, and Elsie watched him. She could do nothing for poor Nina, whose clothes needed no mending. The longer the doll doctor worked, the more fond he became of the yellow hair and beautiful brown glass eyes. He sometimes forgot all the other dolls that were waiting to be mended, lying side by side on a shelf, and sat for an hour gazing at Nina's face. while he racked his ingenuity for some new invention by which to hide even the smallest trace of the terrible accident. She was wonderfully mended. Even he was obliged to admit that, but the scar was still visible to the keen eye, a very fine line right across the face, downwards from right to left. Yet all the conditions had been most favorable for a cure, since the cement had set quite hard at the first attempt, and the weather had been fine and dry, which makes a difference in a doll's hospital. At last he knew that he could do no more, and the under-nurse had already come twice to see whether the job was finished, as she coarsely expressed it. "Nina's not quite strong yet," Mr. Puckler had answered each time, for he could not make up his mind to face the parting. And now he sat before the square deal table at which he worked, and Nina lay before him for the last time, with a big brown paper box beside her. It stood there like her coffin, waiting for her, he thought. He must put her into it and lay tissue paper over her dear face, and then put on the lid, and at the thought of tying the string, his sight was dim with tears again. He was never to look into the glassy depths of the beautiful brown eyes any more, nor to hear the little wooden voice say, "Papa" and "Mama." It was a very painful moment for him. In the vain hope of gaining time before the separation, he took up the little sticky bottles of cement and glue and gum and color, looking at each one in turn, and then at Nina's face. And all his small tools lay there, neatly arranged in a row, but he knew that he could not use them again for Nina. She was quite strong at last, and in a country where there should be no cruel children to hurt her, she might live 100 years. With only that almost imperceptible line across her face, to tell of the fearful thing that had befallen her on the marble steps of Cranston House. Suddenly, Mr. Puckler's heart was quite full, and he rose abruptly from his seat and turned away. "Elsie," he said unsteadily, "you must do it for me. I cannot bear to see her go into the box." So he went and stood at the window with his back turned, while Elsie did what he had not the heart to do. "Is it done?" he asked, not turning around. "Then take her away, my dear. Put on your hat and take her to Cranston House quickly. And when you are gone, I will turn around." Elsie was used to her father's queer ways with the dolls, and though she had never seen him so much moved by a parting, she was not much surprised. "Come back quickly," he said, and when he heard her hand on the latch, "It is growing late, and I should not send you at this hour, but I cannot bear to look forward to it any more." When Elsie was gone, he left the window and sat down in his place before the table again to wait for the child to come back. He touched the place where Nina had laid very gently and recalled the softly tinted pink face and the glass eyes and the ringlets of yellow hair till he could almost see them. The evenings were long, for it was late in the spring, but it began to grow dark soon, and Mr. Puckler wondered why Elsie did not come back. She had been gone an hour and a half, and that was much longer than he had expected, for it was barely half a mile from Belgrave Square to Cranston House. He reflected that the child must have been kept waiting, but as twilight deepened, he grew anxious, and walked up and down in the dim workshop, no longer thinking of Nina, but of Elsie, his own living child, whom he loved. An undefinable, disquieting sensation came upon him by fine degrees, a chilliness and faint stirring of his thin hair, joined with a wish to be in any company rather than be alone much longer. It was the beginning of fear. He told himself in strong German English that he was a foolish old man, and he began to feel about for the matches in the dusk. He knew just where they should be, for he always kept them in the same place, close to the little tin box that held bits of sealing wax for various colors, for some kinds of mending. But somehow he could not find the matches in the gloom. Something had happened to Elsie, he was sure, and as his fear increased, he felt as though it might be allayed if he could get a light and see what time it was. Then he called himself a foolish old man again, and as the sound of his voice startled him in the dark, he could not find his matches. The window was gray still. He might see what time it was if he could if he went close to it, if he could go and get the matches out of the cupboard afterwards. He stood back from the table to get out of the way of the chair and to begin to cross the board floor. Something was following him in the dark. There was a small pattering, as of tiny feet upon the boards. He stopped and listened, and the roots of his hair tingled. It was nothing, and he was a foolish old man. He made 2 steps more, and he was sure that he heard the little pattering again. He turned his back to the window, leaning against the sash, so that the panes of the window began to crack, and he faced the dark. Everything was quiet still, and it smelt of paste and cement and wood filings as usual. "Is that you, Elsie?" he asked, and he was surprised by the fear in his voice. There was no answer in the room, and he held up his watch and tried to make out just what time it was by the gray dusk that was just not darkness. So far as he could see, it was within 2 or 3 minutes of 10 o'clock. He had been a long time alone. He was shocked and frightened for Elsie, out in London so late, and he almost ran across the room to the door. As he fumbled for the latch, he distinctly heard the running of little feet after him. "Mice!" he exclaimed feebly, just as he got the door open. He shut it quickly behind him and felt as though some cold thing had settled on his back and were writhing upon him. The passage was quite dark, but he found his hat and was out in the alley in a moment, breathing more freely and surprised to find how much light there was still in the open air. He could see the pavement clearly under his feet, and far off in the street to which the alley led, he could hear the laughter and calls of children, playing some game outdoors. He wondered how he could have been so nervous, and for an instant, he thought of going back into the house to wait quietly for Elsie. But instantly, he felt that nervous fright of something stealing over him yet again. In any case, it was better to walk up to Cranston House and ask the servants about the child. One of the women had perhaps taken a fancy to her and was probably even now giving her tea and cake. He walked quickly to Belgrave Square and then up the broad streets, listening as he went, whenever there was no other sound for the tiny footsteps. But he heard nothing and was laughing at himself when he rang the servant's bell at the big house. Of course, the child must be there. The person who opened the door was quite an inferior person, for it was a back door, but affected the manners of the front, and stared at Mr. Puckler superciliously under the strong light. No little girl had been seen, and he knew nothing about no dolls. And that's a quote. "She is my little girl," said Mr. Puckler tremulously, for all his anxiety was returning tenfold, "and I am afraid something has happened." The inferior person said rudely that nothing could have happened to her in that house, because she had not been there, which was a jolly good reason why. And Mr. Puckler was obliged to admit that the man ought to know, as it was his business to keep the door and let people in. He wished to be allowed to speak to the under-nurse, who knew him, but the man was ruder than ever and finally shut the door in his face. When the doll doctor was alone in the street, he steadied himself by the railing, for he felt as though he were breaking in two, just as some dolls break in the middle of the backbone. Presently he knew that he must be doing something to find Elsie, and that gave him strength. He began walking as quickly as he could through the streets, following every highway and byway which his little girl might have taken on her errand. He also asked several policemen in vain if they had seen her, and most of them answered him kindly, for they saw he was a sober man and in his right senses, and some of them had little girls of their own. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when he went up to his own door again, worn out and hopeless and broken-hearted. As he turned the key in his lock, his heart stood still, for he knew that he was awake and not dreaming, and that he really heard those tiny footsteps pattering to meet him inside the house along the passage. But he was too unhappy to be much frightened any more, and his heart went on again with a dull, regular pain that ground its way all the way through him with every pulse. So he went in and hung up his hat in the dark, and found the matches in the cupboard and the candlestick in its place in the corner. Mr. Puckler was so overcome and so completely worn out that he sat down in his chair before the work table and almost fainted as his face dropped forward upon his folded hands. Beside him, the solitary candle burned steadily with a low flame in the still warm air. "Elsie, Elsie," he moaned against his yellow knuckles. And that was all he could say. And it was no relief to him. On the contrary, the very sound of the name was a new and sharp pain that pierced his ears and his head and his very soul. For every time he repeated the name, it meant that little Elsie was dead, somewhere out in the streets of London in the dark. He was so terribly hurt that he did not even feel something pulling gently at the skirt of his old coat, so gently that it was like the nibbling of a tiny mouse. He might have thought it was really a mouse if he had noticed it. "Elsie, Elsie," he groaned, right against his hands. Then a cool breath stirred his thin hair, and the low flame of the one candle dropped down, almost to a mere spark, not flickering, as though a draft were going to blow it out, but just dropping down as if it were tired out. Mr. Puckler felt his hands stiffening with fright under his face, and there was a faint rustling sound, like some small silk thing blowing in a gentle breeze. He sat up straight, stark and scared, and a small wooden voice spoke in the stillness. "Papa," it said, with a break between the syllables. Mr. Puckler stood up in a single jump, and his chair fell over backwards with a smashing noise upon the wooden floor. The candle had almost gone out. It was Nina's doll voice that had spoken, and he should have known it among the voices of the 100 other dolls. And yet there was something more in it. A little human ring with a pitiful cry, and a call for help, and the wail of a hurt child. Mr. Puckler stood up, stark and stiff, and tried to look around, but at first he could not, for he seemed to be frozen from head to foot. Then he made a great effort, and he raised one hand to each of his temples and pressed his own head round as he would have turned a doll's. The candle was burning so low that it might as well have been out altogether for any light that it gave, and the room seemed quite dark at first. Then he saw something. He would not have believed that he could have been more frightened than he already had been just before that. But he was, and his knees shook, for he saw the doll standing in the middle of the floor, shining with a faint and ghostly radiance, her beautiful glassy brown eyes fixed on his. And across his face, the very thin line of the break that he had mended shone as though it was drawn in light with a fine point of white flame. Yet there was something more in the eyes, too. There was something human, like Elsie's own, but as if only the doll saw him through them, not Elsie's. And there was enough of Elsie to bring back all his pain and to make him forget his fear. "Elsie, my little Elsie," he cried aloud. The small ghost moved, and its doll arm slowly rose and fell with a stiff mechanical motion. "Papa," it said. It seemed this time there was even more of Elsie's tone echoing somewhere between the wooden notes that reached his ears so distinctly and yet so far away. Elsie was calling him, he was sure. His face was perfectly white in the gloom, but his knees did not shake anymore, and he felt that he was less frightened. "Yes, child, but where?" he asked. "Where are you, Elsie?" "Papa." The syllables died away in the quiet room. There was a rustling of silk. The glassy brown eyes turned slowly away, and Mr. Puckler heard the pitter-patter of the small feet in the bronze kid slippers as the figure ran straight to the door. Then the candle burned high again, and the room was full of light, and he was alone. Mr. Puckler passed his hand over his eyes and looked about him. He could see everything quite clearly, and he felt that he must have been dreaming, though he was standing instead of sitting down. And he should have been if he had just waked up. The candle burned brightly now. There was the dolls to be mended, lying in a row with their toes up. The third one had lost her right shoe, and Elsie was making one. He knew that, and he was certainly not dreaming now. He had not been dreaming when he had come in from his fruitless search, and he had heard the doll's footsteps running to the door. He had not fallen asleep in his chair. How could he have possibly fallen asleep when his heart was breaking? He had been awake all the time. He steadied himself, set the fallen chair upon its legs, and had said to himself very emphatically that he was a foolish old man. He ought to be out in the street looking for his child, asking questions, and inquiring at the police stations, where all accidents were reported as soon as they were known, at the hospitals. Papa! The longing, wailing, pitiful little wooden cry rang from the passage outside the door, and Mr. Puckler stood for an instant with a white face, transfixed and rooted to the spot. A moment later, his hand was on the latch. Then he was in the passage with the light streaming from the open door behind him. Quite at the other end, he saw the little phantom shining clearly in the shadow, and the right hand seemed to be beckoning him as the arm rose and fell once more. He knew all at once that it had not come to frighten him, but to lead him. And when it disappeared and he walked boldly towards the door, he knew that it was in the street outside, waiting for him. He forgot that he was tired and had eaten no supper and had walked many miles, for a sudden hope ran through and through him like a golden stream of life. And sure enough, at the corner of the alley, and at the corner of the street, and out in Belgrave Square, he saw the small ghost flitting before him. Sometimes it was only a shadow, where there was other light. But then the glare of the lamps made a pale green sheen on its little Mother Hubbard frock of silk. And sometimes, where the street was dark and silent, the whole figure shone brightly, with its yellow curls and rosy neck. It seemed to trot along like a little tiny child, and Mr. Puckler could only almost hear its pattering of the bronze kid slippers on the pavement as it ran. But it went very fast, and he could only keep up with it, tearing along with its hat on its back of its head and his thin hair blown by the night breeze and his horn-rimmed spectacles firmly set upon his broad nose. On and on he went, and he had no idea where he was. He did not even care, for he certainly knew that he was going the right way. Then at last, in a wide, quiet street, he was standing before a big, sober-looking door that had 2 lamps on each side of it and a polished brass bell handle, which he pulled. And just inside, when the door was open, in the bright light, there was a little shadow and the pale green sheen of the little silk dress. And once more the small cry came to his ears, less pitiful and more longing. Papa? The shadow turned suddenly bright, and out of the brightness the beautiful brown glass eyes were turned up happily to his, while the rosy mouth smiled so divinely that the phantom doll looked almost like a little angel just then. A little girl was brought in soon after 10 o'clock, said the quiet voice of the hospital doorkeeper. I think they thought she was only stunned. She was holding a big brown paper box against her, and they could not get it out of her arms. She had a long plait of brown hair that hung down as they carried her. She's my little girl, said Mr. Puckler, but he hardly heard his own voice. He leaned over Elsie's face in the gentle light of the children's ward, and when he had stood there a minute, the beautiful brown eyes opened and looked up to his. Papa, cried Elsie softly, I knew you'd come. Then Mr. Puckler did not know what he said, or he did not know what he did or said for a moment, and what he felt was worth all the fear and terror and despair that had almost killed him that night. But by and by, Elsie was telling her story, and the nurse let her speak, for there were only 2 other children in the room who were getting well and were sound asleep. They were big boys with bad faces, said Elsie, and they tried to get Nina away from me, but I held on and fought as well as I could till one of them hit me with something, and I don't remember anymore, for I tumbled down and I suppose the boys ran away and somebody found me there, but I'm afraid Nina is all smashed. Here's the box, said the nurse. We could not take it out of her arms until she came to herself. Should you like to see if the doll is broken? And she undid the string cleverly, but Nina was all smashed to pieces. Only the gentle light of the children's ward made a pale green sheen in the folds of little Mother Hubbard frock. And that's the end.
I'm glad that the child wasn't dead because I thought she was dead.
Did you think she was dead?
I did. I was getting scared. It was going to be a sad ending.
Nope.
Whew, that was a good one. Those are both good, Tim. I love those.
There you go.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. So that's how we end the show today. And that's our Christmas edition.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So we hope you've all had a Merry Christmas or having a Merry Christmas. We hope your bellies are full, your spirits are bright, and that you have a very joyful Merry Christmas.
And that nothing creepy crawls into bed with you tonight.
That's right. That's the other part of it, too. Yeah, there's nobody in a chain in your bed.
Ooh.
And that your dollies are all solid.
Yeah, I mean, that doll's a superhero.
Yeah. Yep. So there you go. So the spirit of a doll led Mr. Puckler to his daughter. I guess that's the one.
I didn't see that coming. I thought that the doll possessed the child or killed the kid and came back and took her into her body or something.
No, guess not.
Nope. That's good.
All right, so that'll do it. Tomorrow on the big program, Supernatural News. We're switching days, like I said. So Supernatural News for the next program. That'll do it.
Well, Merry Christmas, my friend. It was fun to spend it with you.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you as well.
And Merry Christmas to everyone listening. It was fun to spend it with you, too.
Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night. And there you go. We'll see you tomorrow for Supernatural News. For Jessica Freeburg, I'm Tim Dennis. We'll see you tomorrow for Supernatural News right here on the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio.